Chapter 1. Whoosh, whoosh. ZD opened her mouth wide and tried her best to breathe, even though her chest was already aching. She was sweating profusely. As a mage, her delicate body was now bursting with amazing power, surprising even herself. Faster, faster. I have to get away from here as soon as possible. ZD's mind was filled with thoughts of escaping. This was a dense rainforest. The scorching sun shone through the gaps between the layers of leaves in the rainforest. The air was humid and hot, and the dense vegetation grew extremely luxuriantly because of the abundant rain. The vines and roots intertwined, forming layers of obstacles. ZD had a head of curly black hair, and her wheat-colored skin was oozing with sweat, which made her look even smoother and more tender. Her facial features were exquisite, outlining an extraordinarily beautiful face. The most attractive thing was that she had a pair of big purple eyes, as clear and bright as amethysts. The girl was wearing a green long shirt and pants, a pair of deerskin boots, and a magic robe on the outside. Whether it was the magic robe or the long shirt and pants, they were all torn in many places. There were even a few wounds that were hastily bandaged, but because she was using all her strength at this moment, these wounds were constantly bleeding. The pain radiating from her wounds was tormenting the frail young girl. She stretched out her hand with difficulty, pushing aside the green leaves that were blocking her vision, and then tried her best to take bigger steps on the moist ground that was covered with vegetation. There was a thick hemp rope on her shoulder, and behind the hemp rope seemed to be dragging something heavy, causing the hemp rope to weigh heavily on the girl's tender shoulder. Although the magic robe was tough, the inner lining had already been worn out, and the girl's shoulder was already burning with pain. Pushing aside the leaves, ZD was disappointed to find that there was a large, dense forest in front of her. The tall, broad-leaved trees and the short shrubs together formed a thick wall. Damn it, I have to change paths. The girl subconsciously bit her lips, and her heart became even more anxious. She knew that the current situation was extremely urgent, and everything was a race against time. Her mind was spinning rapidly, but she still wisely gave up on moving forward and changed her path slightly to the left. A dash. Suddenly, a shrill scream came from afar. The girl trembled, as if she was electrocuted. Then, the sense of danger and urgency was like the giant claw of a monster, suddenly grabbing her heart. At this moment, there was only one voice left in her mind. Run, run, run. Leave everything behind. Don't care about anything else. Otherwise, you will be killed by that vicious wolf. Just like those guards, you will be torn apart, chewed up, and finally swallowed into its stomach. The girl's face was pale, and her eyes filled with panic. But when her gaze looked behind her, she became firm again. She dragged the rope, 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 the rope. For some reason, this young man's eyes were tightly shut and he was unconscious. However, he had dazzling golden hair, and his facial features were extremely handsome. He had a natural air of nobility. The rope to her. In such a critical period of life and death, she had to drag along a burden that was even heavier than herself. It was tantamount to handing over her own life. Looking at the young man on the stretcher, ZD clenched her teeth. Then, without any hesitation, she suppressed the panic and nervousness in her heart and continued to drag the stretcher, resisting the terrifying pressure of death and moving forward with all her might. Huff, huff, huff. ZD was panting, her thin body was already weak, and at this moment, she was faintly reaching her limit. It was quiet behind her, and there were no more screams. This meant that the battle was over, and it was very likely that the next moment, the evil wolf would represent the arrival of the Grim Reaper. She wanted to, but lacked the strength. She couldn't run, and could only drag the stretcher step by step, moving forward with difficulty. The dense forest in front of her suddenly thinned out, gradually revealing the blue sky. The sound of flowing river gradually became clear, and not long after, a small river appeared in the girl's vision. The two sides of the river were covered with dense, unknown aquatic plants, and the river was not rapid, nor deep, but the river was wide. The girl estimated that the river was most likely only up to her waist, but she didn't dare to step into the river. This isolated island is full of danger and can't be judged with common sense. I'm almost certain that in this small river, there are crocodiles or large groups of piranhas. I have 16 guards by my side, and now I'm the only one left. Along the way, they sacrifice themselves one after another, using their lives to illustrate the horror of this isolated island. Damn it, if only I could still use magic. The girl observed for a while, bit her lips, and still decided to cross the river. The giant wolf behind her was like the Grim Reaper, and it was very likely that it would continue to chase after her. If she really hesitated, she would be chased by the giant wolf, and there would be no chance of survival. Although the girl was frightened, she didn't completely lose her mind and still maintained a clear understanding and judgment of the situation. She dragged the heavy stretcher and began to move forward along the river. After a moment, the girl's purple eyes flashed with a bright light. She saw a small tree growing at an angle, and the tree trunk extended from the bank to the sky, all the way to the opposite bank. The girl carefully inspected the tree and found that there were no poisonous snakes or thorns hidden in the bushes, but the tree trunk was covered in moss and was very slippery. If the girl climbed this tree alone, she would fall into the river if she wasn't careful. Not to mention, she had a burden. The boy lying on the stretcher had his eyes closed, completely unconscious. Perhaps she should give up on this boy. It was too difficult and risky to carry an unconscious boy across the river. The girl gritted her teeth and quickly untied the rope on the stretcher, and then carried the boy on her back, and then used the rope to tightly bind her and the boy's body. After doing all this, the girl took off her boots and stuffed them between the rope and her body. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to climb the tree with the unconscious boy on her back. The moss on the tree trunk was cut off, and it became even more slippery. I can do it! I can do it! ZD, you can't fall here. You are the president of the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce. You must avenge your father. The brave girl kept cheering herself on. She used all her strength to climb the tree trunk and moved forward again and again. Her purple eyes looked forward, full of determination. Finally, she succeeded in climbing over. Because of the weight of the two people, the small tree trunk was pressed down, causing the young girl to reach the other side of the river. The tree trunk was pressed down to the ground. This made it easier for the girl to land safely. Without the pressure of the two people, the tree trunk rose up again, and the branches and leaves swayed, creating a gust of wind. The girl was still carrying the boy on her back, and weakly knelt on the ground with her hands supporting her body. Her face was pale, and she saw sweat dripping from the tip of her nose and chin, falling on the dense grass on the ground. Her head was slightly dizzy, but her heart was filled with joy. Unbelievable! I did it! I really climbed over. The girl gasped for breath, and the dizziness gradually subsided, but her limbs began to show signs of numbness. This was the after effect of using all her strength. The girl took out her boots from her waist and tried to put them on. At this time, she found that there were large abrasions on the inside of her feet. Her fingernails were all broken and bleeding. She was too nervous when she was climbing the tree trunk. The girl knew that her life was hanging by a thread. Because she was carrying the boy, if she was slightly unsteady, she would not be able to find balance and would fall into the river in an instant. So she was completely focused and used all her strength to climb the tree trunk and did not notice that she was injured. But now, the girl's arms, fingers, and legs began to feel pain, and it was getting more and more intense. In addition, her arms and legs were trembling, and she was sweating too much. Her physical strength was at its limit, and she began to feel cold. The girl's mouth was dry, and although her chest was heaving less, she was getting more and more tired. The unconscious boy was still lying on her back. At this time, the girl felt that the boy was getting heavier. The girl tried to put on her boots again, but at this time, roar! A wolf's roar suddenly came, and then a figure as big as a calf fiercely rushed out from the dense grass. The girl's body and mind trembled, and she subconsciously turned around and saw a dark blue giant wolf. At this moment, her pupils were locked, as if she had fallen into an ice cave. The giant wolf bared its teeth, and there were still bits of fresh meat between its teeth. The wolf's eyes were red, and it stared at the girl, full of violent killing intent. The girl fell into the grass on the shore. She turned around in such a hurry that she forgot that she was carrying the boy. The boy's weight brought a strong inertia, and the girl fell to the ground. Such a weak and sorry state stimulated the giant wolf's ferocious nature. But the giant wolf still stayed on the other side of the river. It jumped in place, paced back and forth, and looked at the murmuring river, revealing a clear look of fear. Seeing the giant wolf's behavior, the girl immediately understood how wise her previous actions were. But in the next moment, the giant wolf also saw the tree trunk, and it actually copied the girl and began to step on the tree trunk that extended to both sides of the river. There was no doubt that this violent giant wolf also had a frightening intelligence. Although the giant wolf's body was strong, it had a good grasp of balance, and its speed was even faster than the girl. The shocked girl seemed to have been electrocuted, and she hurriedly took out a dagger, cut open the rope on her body, and then jumped up and slammed into the tree trunk in the air. The tree trunk was hit and immediately shook. Although the shaking wasn't severe, but it was enough to give the giant wolf enough trouble. The giant wolf's balance was broken, and it almost fell into the river, so it could only awkwardly jump back to the other side of the river. Roar! It roared at the girl, showing its sharp fangs, and became more and more irritable. The girl successfully stopped the giant wolf, and was first overjoyed, but then regretful. I should have let this beast reach the middle of the tree trunk, and then let it fall into the river. The girl and the giant wolf faced each other on the other side of the river. The giant wolf kept roaring, but didn't retreat. The girl stared at the giant wolf, not daring to relax for even a second. Whenever the giant wolf tried to climb the tree trunk, the girl would slam into the tree trunk, causing it to shake. After a while, the girl understood. Her actions in a moment of desperation were correct, because she couldn't accurately estimate how far the giant wolf could jump. If the giant wolf climbed a short distance, it might be able to jump up and directly reach the other side of the river. Even if the giant wolf was shaken into the river by the girl, whether or not the hidden danger in the river would explode, and even if it did, whether or not it could stop the giant wolf, was still unknown. So, the safest thing to do was to not give the giant wolf any chance. As long as it climbed up the tree trunk, the girl would do her best to interfere. As time passed, the giant wolf tried many times, but to no avail. Finally, at a certain moment, it suddenly turned around, ran into the bushes, and disappeared. The girl stood there in a daze, and after a few breaths, she reacted and sat down on the ground. Her numb face gradually relaxed, like melting ice, and 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks. Finally, I got my life back. The girl sobbed softly. Her legs were bent, and her feet were still bare. She still didn't have time to wear boots. She buried her head in the crook of her legs. As she sobbed, her shoulders trembled slightly, as if she was a delicate kitten. But the next moment, the girl suddenly looked up as if she had been electrocuted. Her eyes were red, and there were obvious tear stains on her face. Her expression was complicated. There was shock, suspicion, and panic. Did the giant wolf really give up like this? It's possible. But, thinking back to the terrifying experience of the past few days, the girl felt more and more that the giant wolf didn't give up. It's possible that it suddenly turned around and ran into the bushes to numb me. I'm afraid it's following the river, looking for the next shortcut to reach the other side. Maybe it has already reached the other side and is rushing here. Thinking of this, the girl felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave, chilling her to the bone. What should she do? Carry the boy and climb back along the tree trunk? Not to mention, the tree trunk was a certain height from the ground, and it would be difficult for the girl to carry the boy up. What if the giant wolf stayed where it was? Climb to the middle of the tree trunk and stop? That was even more impossible. It would consume too much stamina. The girl was well aware of her current stamina, and she didn't have the confidence to climb the tree trunk again. Thinking back to the journey, the girl's heart was filled with relief and fear. Carry the boy and continue forward? If the giant wolf chased after them, it would be a dead end. Even if the girl was carrying nothing, her speed would be far slower than the giant wolf. Then there's only one choice left. A determined light flashed in the girl's eyes. She hurriedly ran to the boy's side, half knelt on the ground, and took out a milky white cylindrical crystal. The girl focused and used all her strength to activate the white crystal. The girl pinched the crystal hard, and it was only a millimeter away from the boy's forehead. It hovered above and didn't move for a long time. Is it really not working? No, this is the last hope. Even if it's slim, even if there's only a slight possibility. The girl became more and more anxious and whispered, "Hurry, hurry, I beg you. Hurry up and let it take effect." As if it heard the girl's pleas, the milky white crystal finally started to emit a faint light, so faint that it was almost undetectable. But it was this faint glimmer that was detected by the young girl, and she immediately revealed an expression of great joy. Although most magic is banned on this island, it's only relative. As long as the grade is high enough, it can be used. It's just that the power and effect is greatly reduced. Magic was like that, and so were magic tools. The light emitted by the white crystal pillar gradually became thicker, and then, like water droplets condensing enough, it formed a stream of milky white light. A small stream of water droplets dripped onto the unconscious boy's forehead, and then miraculously blended into his skin. In just a short moment, ZD, who was struggling to activate the crystal pillar, was already pale, her forehead was covered in sweat, and her body was on the verge of collapsing. The crystal pillar also started to lose its color, and starting from the top, it gradually turned into a gray stone. Persevere, I must persevere, I can't give up halfway. ZD squeezed out all the energy in her body, and almost hypnotized herself, constantly challenging the limits of her ability. When the crystal pillar had lost half of its color, ZD was already in a semi-conscious state and was only relying on her obsession to support herself. I must wake her up, woo. The wolf's howl suddenly sounded, and the huge blue wolf that disappeared was extremely fast, suddenly rushing out from the dense grass. At this moment, the Grim Reaper had arrived. ZD was shocked, and her delicate body trembled. She subconsciously raised her head, and her beautiful face was already covered by the shadow of the huge wolf's body. She saw that the huge wolf had already jumped into the air and was swooping down towards her. At this moment, time seemed to have slowed down. The wolf's mouth was wide open, revealing ferocious sharp teeth, and even splashing saliva. Am I going to die? ZD's consciousness wanted to struggle, but her body was already unresponsive, and she had already exhausted all her energy. I can't accept this. The strong aura of death hit her in the face, and the girl's purple eyes carried a final hope, looking at the crystal pillar in her hand. That crystal pillar, 2/3 of it had already lost its color and turned into gray stone, but there was still 1/3 left. There's no hope. Chapter 2. Darkness. There was only a deep darkness. In this darkness, the youth's consciousness gradually recovered. Where's this place? Where am I? The youth's consciousness became clearer, and he began to ask questions. The endless darkness shrouded him. It was silent, and there was no response. The youth's hope was dwindling. He looked at himself, but he could not see himself. The confusion in his heart grew. Then, who am I? Who am I? Why am I trapped here? The sober youth gradually became impatient. Although the darkness was safe, it was unchanging. It was like a cage, trapping him. Naturally, he began to want to break free and leave this place. I want to leave, but where do I go? Is there a path for me to take? Is there a way out? As if in response to the youth's confusion, a light began to appear in the darkness. The light was orange. It was very weak. It was vague, but it was not. However, in this completely dark environment, Even if the orange light was weak, it was still very obvious. This attracted the youth's full attention. The youth tried his best to get closer to the light. After an unknown amount of time, the youth seemed to get closer to the orange light, and the orange light seemed to be a little bigger than before. "Where's that? Can you let me walk out of here?" The youth's desire to escape the darkness grew, and he eagerly got closer to the orange light. However, at this moment, roar! An earth-shattering bestial roar suddenly shook the entire dark space. The orange light was like a frightened small animal, and it suddenly extinguished. The youth woke up with a start. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a giant wolf swooping down from the sky with its mouth wide open. The youth was still lying on the ground. The young man's mind was blank, and before he could even feel fear, his body reacted first. He turned over and kicked. At this moment, his entire body was like a crossbow, and his legs were the arrows that shot out. Bang! The youth's leg kicked the giant wolf's abdomen, and with one blow, the giant wolf was sent flying. The youth's palms pressed against the ground, and he used force to get up. "Someone's here?" As he got up, the youth hurriedly glanced and saw the girl's ED. It was just a fleeting glance, but he didn't have time to think too much. The huge wolf gave him a strong sense of threat, which made his heart tremble. Fear quickly overflowed in his heart. This is a silver-ranked, magical beast. The danger was still there. The young man's eyes glowed brightly as his gaze locked onto the giant wolf. Plop! Water splashed everywhere. The giant wolf was sent flying by the youth's kick. Unable to leverage its momentum in midair, it drew an arc and fell into the river. This was not surprising. ZD was originally by the river and was very close to the river. The ferocious giant wolf fell into the water, but it let out an extremely terrified howl. It used all its strength to splash against the river, trying to get ashore quickly. Suddenly, several green shadows rose from the river. These green shadows were as thick as pythons. Suddenly, they went berserk and set off huge waves. Almost instantly, the green shadow tied up the wolf and dragged it into the water. Whoosh! Whoosh! The surface of the river was no longer tranquil. Turbid waves continued to rise. Soon after, dark red blossoms bloomed like flowers. This was wolf blood. The wolf blood flowed along with the churning of the river, spreading rapidly. In just a few short breaths, the giant wolf's howl completely disappeared. The river began to calm down. The wolf's blood mixed with the turbid river water and quickly faded with the flow of the river water. Soon, the surroundings returned to normal. As if nothing had happened, the wolf disappeared. The mysterious and terrifying green shadow also disappeared. The life and death battle from before did not seem to have happened. Seeing all this happen, the young man was even more shocked. What the hell is this place? With horror in his heart, he began to look around. Finally, he turned around to face the young girl ZD. "Where is this?" ZD's face was full of shock. She did not move, like a statue. After hearing the young man's question, the young girl finally reacted. "Sir!" She was extremely excited. Like a frightened kitten, she threw herself into the young man's arms. Fragrant jade filled his arms. The young man looked at the young girl in his arms. For a moment, he was at a loss. "Thank the heavens, sir, you're finally awake." The young girl excitedly hugged the young man tightly. "Sir, you're awake." The young man patted her shoulder, then pushed ZD away. ZD raised her head to look at the young man. Her excitement and surprise were overflowing. The young man looked at the young girl in his arms. Suddenly, his heart seemed to skip a beat. Her delicate face was full of weakness. Her eyes were red, and she was about to cry. Her pair of purple eyes were so beautiful that it reminded people of gemstones. There was a hint of charm in their brilliance. It seems that the wolf must have given her quite a scare. The young man's heart softened. Then he asked, "May I ask, who are you?" The young girl was stunned. Her eyes widened. She looked up at the young man. Her eyes did not move. They looked at each other for a few seconds. The young man's serious and confused expression made the young girl gradually show surprise and worry. She quickly introduced herself. "I'm ZD. Sir, I'm your fiancé." Fiancé. The young man frowned. When it came to fiancés, he was still familiar with them. He did not expect the young girl in front of him to have such a close relationship with him. ZD. The young man chewed on this name. However, to the young man, this was a completely unfamiliar name. The more he thought about it, the more the young man frowned. Wait a minute. Who am I? He realized that he had forgotten his identity. When he tried to recall the relevant memories, his mind was empty, as if it had always been like this. You're Jinjin. You're Baron Jinjin. Oh my God, sir. Have you forgotten your own identity? ZD's face was full of anxiety. Her uneasiness was rapidly growing. Jinjin. I'm Jinjin? Why don't I remember anything? The young man frowned. He was very puzzled and distressed. Oh my God, why is it like this? ZD was also a loss. But soon, her pair of purple eyes revealed a thoughtful light. She shook her head and said, Perhaps, sir, your head suffered a violent blow. Therefore, you temporarily lost your memory. There have been similar cases. Sir, we encountered a shipwreck a few days ago. The storm swept through, the ship broke, and the survivors were stranded on this island. Many people went missing, including you. I followed the clues and found you in the depths of the rainforest. You had already fallen into a coma. I tried many methods, but none of them could wake you up. Wait, perhaps it was because my method of waking you up was destroyed midway. If this is the truth, then I'm really sorry, sir. At that time, I had no other choice. ZD pointed at Junjin's chest. There were still many crystal shards attached to it. Junjin looked down and saw the crystal shards on his chest. So, it was you who woke me up? Then, the young girl told the young man in detail about what had just happened, as well as why she risked using the white crystal to save the young man. Hearing this, the young man looked at the young girl in a new light. He praised, So it was so dangerous before. It's all thanks to you. ZD. The young man softly called the young girl's name. But sir, you might have lost your memory because of this. ZD whispered. She was still worried and guilty about this. Seeing the self-blame on the young girl's face, the young man's heart softened. He hurriedly comforted her. This is not your fault, ZD. On the contrary, I have to thank you. If you didn't make such a wise choice, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to wake up in time. Right now, I must have been eaten by that giant wolf. Let's put aside the memory issue for now. Right now, the most important thing is to leave this dangerous place. Although the two of them still had very limited communication, the young man had just woken up and experienced a moment of life and death. He deeply understood the danger of this place. His first thought was to leave first. Wait a moment. The young girl tried to collect the shattered crystal shards as much as possible. Among them, most of the crystal shard were still attached to the young man's clothes. Perhaps these will help Sir to recover his memory in the future. ZD held the shards in her hands and carefully handed them to the young man. The young man looked at the shards and found that some of them were gray stone shards, while others looked like milky white crystals. He couldn't help but recall the situation when he was unconscious. He couldn't help but guess. Could it be that the light eyes saw in the darkness was made by this crystal? What exactly are these? The young man Jinjin was curious. Angel's Tear. According to ZD's introduction, this was a high-grade magic tool. This island is very strange. Magic and chi cannot be used. I used this to wake Sir up, but it was just a gamble. This is an anti-magic domain. Jinjin found that he still had some common sense. He shook his head. There's no such thing as an absolute anti-magic domain. The key is the comparison of power. Yes, sir. ZD looked at the shard in her hands. A high-grade tool like the Angel's Tear can still be used here. My magic is only at the iron rank. Under the suppression of this environment, there is no way to use it. Keep it for me. Jinjin found that his hands were empty, and then he saw ZD's delicate leather pouch. Yes. The young girl nodded vigorously and opened the pouch, revealing the bottles and jars inside. It was an exquisitely crafted potion pouch. She took out a glass bottle the size of an adult's finger and stuffed the shards into it. Then she closed it with a cork and put it in the most secure compartment of the pouch. Sir, Please let me examine you. ZD closed the potion pouch and slightly raised her head, looking at Jinjin with a pair of bright purple eyes. She was very concerned. I am a low-grade magician. ZD introduced herself. Although I can't use magic now, my knowledge is still there. Jinjin nodded. Magicians were usually erudite, even if they were so young. The young girl carefully examined Jinjin's chest, back, ears, and other parts. Jinjin felt the young girl's hands groping his body, and his heart rippled. Finally, ZD approached Jinjin's face and carefully observed the young man's pupils to see if there was anything strange. The two of them were so close that they could feel each other's breath. The young girl's breath seemed to have some kind of sweetness. Jinjin's head itched, and he turned his head slightly, not facing the young girl. While ZD was examining him, he was also examining his own body. ZD's skin was wheat-colored, but his was pure white. Jinjin also vaguely felt that although his body was thin and weak, there was a tenacious strength hidden in it. He constantly tried to stretch his 10 fingers and then clench his fists. In his mind, he recalled the scene of him kicking the giant wolf and secretly felt the dormant strength in his body. This strength was obviously unusual. ZD, how old am I? Sir, you are 16 years old this year. I am 15. The young girl looked very serious as she examined Jinjin's body and introduced herself. Okay. The young girl stopped and took a step back, as if she was relieved. Sir, it seems that your body only has residual bruises from before. From the outside, there is no problem. The conditions here are too simple. In the future, I could do a detailed physical examination for you. Jinjin nodded and continued to ask. Then, am I also a magician? What kind of strength do I have? ZD shook her head. Sir, you cultivate Do Chi. You are a temple knight. Temple knight? The young man was absent-minded for a moment, and then a memory of unknown origin appeared in his mind. In the bright and majestic white palace, sunlight shone in through the towering rainbow-colored glass windows. A group of young men gathered together, and Jinjin found himself in the group of young men. The atmosphere was solemn, and there was a certain eagerness. Jinjin and the other young men swore together. I swear to respect and love the living God, the great emperor of the empire, the Shengming emperor. I swear to work hard to follow in the footsteps of the commander and bravely move forward. I swear to protect my loved ones and not be afraid of danger. I swear to treat my friends sincerely and refuse to be hypocritical. I swear that I will love you till death do us part, and I will never leave you. I swear to fight against violence and treat the weak well. I swear to maintain justice and fight against all wrongs. From today onwards, I am a temple knight. The scene in his memory disappeared in a flash. Sir, do you remember anything? ZD saw Jinjin's strange behavior and asked expectantly. Jinjin nodded. Yes, I remember. When I became a temple knight, the moment I solemnly swore. When ZD heard this, her eyes lit up. Sir, perhaps you can try and see if you can use fighting energy? Jinjin clenched his fists and thought back. After a while, he frowned and shook his head. No, I don't have any memory of practicing fighting energy. I can't even feel the fighting energy in my body, and I don't know how to use it. ZD's eyes darkened slightly, and then she comforted. Perhaps the time has not come yet, but it doesn't matter, sir. At least this proves that your memory can be recovered. It just takes some time. Jinjin nodded. He felt that although the girl in front of him was weak, she was optimistic and had a tenacious personality. Since he woke up, the girl had been comforting him. However, there were still clear traces of tears on the girl's cheeks. Her fingernails were broken and bleeding slightly. Her feet stepped on the grass, and she didn't have time to put on her boots. Although ZD only gave a brief description, Jean Needles already knew the danger of the previous scene. Life and death could be described as a thin line. The most commendable thing was that no matter how dangerous the situation was, the girl didn't give up on him while he was unconscious. It could be said that she didn't leave him and didn't care about life or death. The oath of a temple knight was still in his ears. So, I am a knight, a noble temple knight. Jean felt the glory and raised his head slightly, pride rising in his heart. At the same time, a warm feeling gradually spread in Jin's heart. Then, let me protect you from now on. Strong purple-eyed girl, my fiancée. Jean swore in his heart. Chapter 3. Jean and ZD cautiously walked along the river. The river gurgled, the banks were lush and green, and the vegetation was quite dense. The two walked for a while, the river gradually narrowed, and the terrain slowly rose, finally forming two mounds separated by the river, looking at each other from afar. The two mounds were not far apart, rooted on both sides of the river, but extended a section above the river. The vegetation on the mounds was sparse. Jean and ZD went up the mound, observing along the way. ZD, your guess is right. That wolf really came from here. Jean's tone was quite certain, because the traces left by the wolf were quite obvious. He looked at the girl in front of him, and his evaluation of her in his heart increased by another level. Before the two of them set off, ZD had taken the initiative to go back. Jean agreed with this suggestion. The environment of this island was dangerous, and the two of them were empty-handed. It was very dangerous. More importantly, they lacked water and food, and it was very difficult to gather them by themselves. The previous search and rescue team had brought a lot of supplies, but going back the way they came was too risky. Previously, ZD climbed a tree trunk, crossed the river, and came to the other side of the river. Now, after the accident, the tree trunk was not stable, and the surface of the tree trunk was very slippery. Jean had no experience in climbing, and ZD said frankly, although she succeeded once, she did not have the confidence to climb again. It was too risky. The first success was simply a miracle. Once they fell into the river, they would probably arouse the hidden green vines in the river. These green vines were as thick as pythons, and the silver-level blue giant wolf was entangled by the green vines. Without any resistance, it lost its life. Jean speculated that these green vines hidden in the river were at least silver-level creatures. But its breath had always been restrained and could not be felt. If Jean and ZD fell into the river, there was absolutely no chance of survival. So, ZD went on to suggest that they might as well explore the direction of the giant wolf. Now it seemed that her suggestion was indeed correct. Although the wolf was ferocious, it was not in human form and was not good at climbing. Moreover, it was well aware of the dangers in the water, so the path it took to attack was also very useful. The two climbed up the mound. The highest point of the mound was about 3 meters above the ground, but it was still more than 4 meters away from the mound on the other side. After discovering this, ZD couldn't help but be afraid and glad. Fortunately, I shook the trunk in time before, making the wolf unstable and unable to jump. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have already been buried in the belly of a wolf. A distance of more than 4 meters, vicious wolf could jump over, and Jean, who had practiced Ochi, could also try. But for ZD, it was a big challenge. We can build a temporary wooden bridge. Jean quickly came up with an idea. Although animals were ferocious, humans were intelligent and could make tools. This was a huge advantage. Jean looked around and made his choice. He walked a few steps and arrived under a tree. The trees on the mound had sparse branches and leaves, which was obviously different from the normal rainforest on the riverbank. Jean stretched out his hands and grabbed a branch. With a light shout, he suddenly exerted force. This branch was as thick as an adult's thigh, and under Jean's strength, it immediately bent violently. However, what followed was a stalemate. Jean used all his strength, and blood filled his face, but the branch showed toughness, which surprised him. In the end, the branch did not break, and Jean's follow-up strength was getting weaker and weaker, so he could only give up temporarily. He shook his head and glanced at ZD. Then, he looked at the branch that made him fail. He gritted his teeth and said with a trace of anger, "Try a few more times, and I will definitely be able to break it." The look of expectation in ZD's eyes did not fade at all, and she nodded. Lord Jinjin, with your strength, you can definitely do it. ZD cultivated magic, and Junjin cultivated Do Qi. Even if he could not use Do Qi, the process of cultivating Do Qi had molded Junjin's strong body. Junjin's strength, speed, and other attributes were far superior to the average person. However, ZD quickly said, Lord Jinjin, these mounds are a bit strange. The soil is reddish-brown, and the trees that grow on them also seem to be more resilient than normal trees. Junjin's eyes focused, and he carefully looked around, feeling that ZD's words were very reasonable. The anger in his heart quickly dissipated, and his impression of the girl increased. The girl did not lose a trace of expectation because of Junjin's failure. More importantly, the girl did not comfort Jinjin for no reason, but carefully observed and used her keen insight to provide the most practical help to Jinjin. Maybe I should break the ordinary branches under the mound and build a bridge. This will save more energy. Stamina was very important and could not be wasted. Especially now, Junjin and ZD were empty-handed, without any supplies. However, just as Jinjin was about to walk down the mound, a strange sound came from the forest in the distance. The tall trees fell one by one, and a huge beast appeared in front of Junjin's eyes. What is this? Junjin's pupil shrank. It looks a bit like a dragon turtle. ZD's face was also full of shock. The youth and the girl hurriedly hid in the bushes. It's not a dragon turtle. The huge turtle supported itself with all its strength, its four legs as thick as pillars, deeply sinking into the soil. However, the number of green vines soon reached more than 20, and the huge turtle was gradually unable to resist, and its body was dragged inch by inch into the river. ZD sucked in a breath of cold air. The terror of the green vines made her heart palpitate. She originally thought that the green vines in the river were silver tier magic plants, but now that they had erupted and could not be restrained, they were gold tier magic plants. Both the green vines and the huge turtle were gold tier magic beasts, but the green vines undoubtedly had the advantage. Just when the two of them thought that the huge turtle had lost from the holes on the turtle's shell, a thick black smoke suddenly spewed out. The thick smoke rose into the sky, and a majestic heat spread out, causing the surrounding air to become scorching hot. After a few breaths, from the holes on the turtle shell, dark red magma flowed out. The magma flowed down the turtle shell continuously. The green vines suffered, covered by the magma, and were quickly burned and buried. The 20 or so green vines that were burned quickly retreated into the river water with flames. The magma, however, slowly flowed down into the river water, causing water vapor to fill the air. The huge turtle was thus freed and slowly turned around to leave with its four legs, leaving behind a pool of half-solidified magma. The magma quickly cooled down, turning into a dark red mound. However, the heat in the air still lingered, and Junjin and ZD were already covered in sweat. ZD could not hide her fear, and looked at the huge turtle that was slowly moving away, and said, I finally understand. The mound under our feet was left behind by the huge turtle. No wonder the terrain was so abrupt. What kind of monster is this? Junjin exclaimed, his heart thumping. ZD shook her head. She cultivated magic, and usually paid attention to the accumulation of knowledge, but she knew nothing about this huge ivory turtle that could spit magma. Fortunately, everything was daunting but not dangerous. The huge turtle was not interested in them, and Jinjin and ZD were also very cautious and did not fall into the river water. Many of the animals and plants on this island are extremely strange, and I have never seen them in my life. Let's quickly leave this place, ZD said. Junjin nodded, trotted down the mound, and quickly carried a lot of broken wood to build a bridge. The huge turtle trampled and broke countless trees, which made it very convenient for Jinjin. The two successfully crossed the bridge and returned to the other side. After walking upstream for a while, ZD successfully found the traces left behind by her escape. Jinjin, however, had a heavy heart. In such a short time, Jean saw a silver wolf, a type of golden river vine, and a golden giant turtle. This island was too dangerous. He realized that he was in a precarious situation. I can't use my chi, and with my current strength, even breaking a branch is a bit difficult. Dealing with the wolf before was completely a trick. At that time, the wolf was in the air and could not borrow strength. My sudden awakening and attack caught it off guard. It had no way to dodge, and in the end, it was shot down into the river. The terrifying green vine in the water immediately took the wolf's life. If it was a fair fight, I'm afraid that I would be in danger. If I encounter such a fierce beast, what should I do? Jean was distressed. Right now, he was unarmed and defenseless, and he couldn't even use his fighting chi. His memory was incomplete, and even if he tried hard, he could not dig out any memories related to chi. Without fighting energy, he would be nothing more than a moving piece of food in this forest where danger lurked on every side. I can't even protect myself. How can I save ZD? Jean looked at the girl in front of him and could not help but feel anxious and guilty. ZD, in order to save me, did not care about her life. How deep is her friendship? Although we have only known each other for a short time, she is so understanding. She has sharp insight, a calm mind, and has been doing her best to help me. Jean looked at the back of the girl in front of him, his emotions fluctuating. The girl was now leading the way, carefully identifying the previous traces. The forest was dense, and if he got lost, it would undoubtedly be more dangerous. I want to live, and I want to protect her. Jean once again made up his mind. Right, ZD. Jean broke the silence and took the initiative to ask, how is my strength? Without a way to sense chi, Jean could not even detect his own strength at this time. The girl slowed down her pace, slightly turned back, and replied in a measured tone. Sir, the outside world recognizes your strength as black iron. Jean could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. ZD's answer was very interesting. Recognized by the outside world? Jean asked again, and slightly raised his arm to the front, indicating that the girl should speak as they walked. Yes. ZD nodded and continued to explore. Sir, the strength you usually show is black iron. But according to my speculation, it is definitely more than that. Because this time, sir, you are crossing the sea to compete for the position of White Sand City's lord. And the lord of a city has to be at least silver to be able to convince the public. This time, the answer was even more informative. Jean quickly thought. His memory was incomplete, and most of it was about himself, but his general knowledge and current affairs were still relatively complete. At least he did not lack in this aspect. The Shengming Emperor of the human race was a man of great talent and vision. Not only did he unify the human continent, but he also formed an expeditionary army to cross the ocean and invade the wilderness continent. White Sand City was a castle built by the human race on the wilderness continent, a nail that the Shengming Emperor embedded in the wilderness continent. There were more than a dozen bridgeheads similar to White Sand City, and the number was still increasing. New castles were constantly being built. From the beginning, the human castles were quickly being placed in the center of the wilderness continent. Jean was a member of the human race's expedition against the beast men, but he was not the vanguard, but a follower. I want to compete for the position of White Sand City's lord. Although there are Black Iron City's lords in the wilderness continent's White Sand City, I'm afraid there won't be a Black Iron City's lord. Jean analyzed in his mind. Whether it was fighting aura or magic cultivation, it would bring about the sublimation of the essence of life. Bronze rank, black iron rank, silver rank, and gold rank. Bronze were the elites of the human race. Often, the captains in the army were at this level of cultivation. Black iron was higher than bronze, and the essence of life was one level higher. They were usually the backbone of organizations and forces. ZD was one of them. Silver was qualified to be the lord of a city and could suppress an area. Gold was even rarer. They were usually the pillars of a large noble or a small kingdom. Based on this, I should have the strength of a silver. I'm 16 years old this year, and I'm already a silver. My talent is indeed extraordinary. Not only that, I should have kept this a secret, causing the outside world to only acknowledge that I'm at least black iron. It seems that although I'm young, I'm still quite shrewd. Jean continued to deepen his understanding of himself. At his age, even if he was at the black iron rank, it was already quite impressive. ZD was like that. To have a silver cultivation at the age of 16, she was worthy of the title of a genius. Of course, there were even more geniuses. To have a gold cultivation at the age of 16 was not impossible, but it was usually quite rare within a country. If Jinjin had a gold cultivation, he might not have been sent to the wilderness continent to take the risk of competing for some white sand city lord position. Such a genius of a country would have long been protected by forces or killed in advance. Thanks, by Yi Shi Wu Di, Demon King Fong Yuan. Roses do not smell sweet because of its name. Drew Teacher, hysterical elegance, desolate ancient moon. Firmament Herno, little caddy under Torrent City. Book friend 20180-430083646647. Zhou Yong 00. Akil can become the alliance leader of the new book Unlimited Blood Core. In just one day, I've seen many familiar IDs. Old friends are all here, and we're all together again. This feeling is great. I'm about to thank everyone for their support. Reminder, there are still many friends asking me about True Master Goo and Unlimited Blood Core. My personal ability is limited, and I can't reply to all of their private messages. So, it's best if everyone could take a look at the preface of this book. It has already answered many basic questions. To answer some more questions, 1. This book will be updated around 4,000 words a day during the new book's release, and the update time is around 12 o'clock. It will be released on Chidian website. Please try to support it as much as possible. 2. Unlimited Blood Core, official Penguin Group Chat 676-199-473 has been opened. 3. It has been opened. 4. It has been created. 5. After being reminded by many friends I know about the investment. Make a bold investment. You won't lose out. You'll definitely make a profit. 6. Unlimited Blood Core has a slightly cold-blooded style. 7. The character column will be open this afternoon. 8. Everyone take your time to read. I'll tell everyone responsibly that the later chapters will get more and more interesting. In the future, please don't go back to the previous chapters to spoil things. Chapter 4. Jinjin and ZD shuttled through the dense forest. The leaves above their heads were getting thicker, almost covering the entire sky. The air was extremely hot and humid. The vines wrapped around them, and if they were not careful, they would trip. Stepping on the ground, they felt soft because there were many rotten leaves on the ground. ZD's footsteps paused. It's nearby. Jin's eyes narrowed. He knew what the girl meant. This was the place where she had separated from the others and escaped alone. According to ZD's description, when the wolf was chasing them, in order to stall for time, the last 3 guards stayed here and did their best to delay the wolf, giving ZD and the unconscious Jin a chance to survive. After walking for a few more steps and going around a thick tree, the two of them saw a corpse. In the bushes, the 2 corpses were a dozen steps away from each other, emitting a strong smell of blood. Their eyes were wide open, and their faces were still filled with fear and anger. ZD could not help but hold her breath and stop in place. Jinjin took a few steps forward and bent down to investigate. Whoosh! Suddenly, a thick black and red line, like an arrow from a crossbow, shot from under the corpse, aiming at Jinjin's face. Jinjin's hair stood on end, and his pupils shrank to the size of a needle. He reached out his hand. In an instant, he caught the thick black and red line. Jin's finger caught the thick black and red line on the head, and he immediately saw. It was a very strange poisonous snake. The poisonous snake's scales were black, and its head was bright red. From the head to the back of the snake, all the way to the tail, it formed a clear red line. And on both sides of the poisonous snake's body, there were hundreds of centipede-like black legs. This is a bronze-ranked magical beast. Jun felt the life force of the centipede snake and immediately showed a strained expression. Ah, careful! Everything happened too quickly, and ZD only reacted now and cried out in alarm. This is a blood thread flying snake. The poison is very strong, and it will die within a few breaths. ZD hurriedly explained, and its centipede legs can even pierce through leather armor. Just as he finished speaking, the bloodline centipede's counterattack arrived. It twisted its body and wrapped itself around Jun's arm. The hundreds of centipede legs were almost all embedded into the young man's arm, and they were getting deeper and deeper. Blood gushed out, and pain assaulted Jun's head. At the same time, Jun felt his arm being squeezed by a huge force. His flesh and blood seemed to be squeezed into a pulp, and his arm bones were also groaning. He hurriedly exerted force with his fingers, wanting to strangle the snake to death. However, the snake bones were very hard, and the snake scales were also very tough and slippery. Jun shouted in a low voice as he pressed the snake's head to the ground. His other hand quickly pulled out a dagger, raised it high, and fiercely stabbed down. The dagger seemed to have pierced through a hard rock, nailing the snake's head to the ground. The venomous snake retaliated before its death, its centipede legs digging in by an inch, causing Jun's arm to become even more bloody. However, after a few breaths, the venomous snake's body went completely limp. Although it no longer had the power to bind him, the hard centipede legs were still embedded in the young man's flesh. Jun gritted his teeth, retrieved the dagger, and quickly retreated. Only after he was far away from the corpse did he pull out the centipede legs one by one. ZD hurriedly took out the medicinal powder from her waist pouch and sprinkled a layer of it on the wound on Jun's arm. She then took out a white bandage and quickly bandaged the young man's wound. The wound was rather deep, but Jun's physique was very good. Coupled with the effects of the medicine, the bleeding stopped very quickly. Moreover, a cool and even somewhat sour feeling, mixed with a faint pain, was constantly transmitted from the wound to Jun's head. What kind of medicine is this? It's so effective? Isn't it said that the use of magic and fighting aura is forbidden on this island? Jun was curious about the medicine's immediate effects. This is a kind of medicinal herb that originates from the barbarian tribes of the Frostland. This isn't a magic medicine, but simply makes use of the nature of the herb, ZD explained. Magic medicine was a method used by potioneers to successfully mix the ingredients and magic power within to form a balanced and stable state. Because this kind of medicine contained magic power, it often took effect quickly and with outstanding results. ZD looked at Jun's wound, her eyes somewhat red. She said with shame and guilt, "Fortunately, the centipede legs aren't poisonous. I'm sorry, my lord, for causing you to be injured. I should have told you this information earlier." Jun couldn't help but feel pity for the young lady. He shook his head and hurriedly consoled her. "This isn't your fault." After crossing the river, they hurried through the forest, extremely vigilant of their surroundings. Even if there was some communication, it was limited, and they did their best to avoid distracting each other. The speed at which the bloodline centipede had emerged from the corpse was too fast, beyond Jun's expectations. Even a snake on this island is so strange and sinister. Jun returned to his previous position and used the front end of his dagger to pry open the snake's head, then conveniently cut open its body. If only I could use my fighting aura, I wouldn't have been injured. Jun sighed inwardly. Regardless of whether he had silver or iron rank fighting aura, as long as he had used his fighting aura to defend himself, it would have been very difficult for the centipede legs to pierce through his arm. Jun observed the insides of the poisonous snake's body. There was a large amount of undigested food in the snake's belly. The young knight's eyes flashed. It seems that this kind of centipede likes to devour the internal organs of its prey and lives on blood. No wonder it emerged from the corpse. Strange. After searching twice, Jun felt puzzled. Where's the crystal core of this magical beast? Magical beasts could absorb natural elements and brew their own magic power. This kind of magic power would accumulate over time and form a crystallization of magic power, a magical beast crystal core. Newborn magical beasts didn't have a crystal core in their bodies. The crystal core in a baby magical beast was very small, but adult magical beasts had a crystal core. This bloodline centipede wasn't a baby at all. It was a mature one, but it didn't have a crystal core. This puzzled Jinjin. ZD explained in a timely manner. There are many strange magical beasts on this island. Their life force is very strong, but they don't have a crystal core in their bodies. The search and rescue team killed some magical beasts before, but they didn't find any crystals in their bodies. But perhaps it's also because of this reason that these magical beasts haven't displayed any similar spells. I see. Jinjin finally understood. Although the value of the demonic beast crystal core was not small, if these demonic beasts could not use such spells because of the lack of magic crystals, it would definitely be more beneficial than harmful for Gold Needle and Purple Stem. Jinjin thought of the fight between the green vine and the giant tortoise. The lava that the giant tortoise spewed out didn't have any fluctuations of magic power. It wasn't a spell that it activated by using its magic power. It was a kind of biological instinct. This wasn't strange. Some dragon beasts had special structures in their mouths, such as poison gland pouches, sulfur pouches, and so on. They could spit out the venom and sulfur in the pouches at the same time as they spit out air, forming a venom spit or a flame spit. This wasn't a spell, but an ability of the creature itself. After dealing with the bloodline centipede, Jinjin went to check the corpses again. The two guards on the ground were already dead. One of them had a fatal wound on his throat. His entire neck was almost bitten off, leaving only a trace of flesh at the back of his neck. The other person was even more tragic. His entire head was severely deformed, and brain matter mixed with blood flowed all over the ground. These were all fatal wounds. Both of their stomachs were smashed. These injuries were obviously caused by the poisonous snake. Jinjin's expression became more serious. He stood up and looked around. He carefully discovered that the surrounding bushes had been trampled and broken badly. In the eyes of ordinary people, this scene was chaotic and disorderly. However, Jinjin found that he could effortlessly distinguish between the traces left by humans and the traces left by wolves. Even according to these traces, he could draw a virtual route in front of his eyes. The young man narrowed his eyes. His line of sight followed the route that appeared in his mind and gradually looked into the distance. But soon, the bushes and dense forest blocked his line of sight. Jinjin took a few steps forward, passed through the bushes, and turned around a big tree. At this time, a rare open space in the forest appeared in front of him. ZD followed Jinjin to this open space. Jinjin looked down at his feet and found that there were still footprints left on the open space. This was because the ground in the dense forest was piled up with a considerable amount of rotten leaves. The rain was very heavy, causing the rotten leaves to contain a lot of water. Therefore, the heavier a person was, the deeper the footprints on the ground would be, and often some water stains would seep out. The footprints on the open space were very far apart from each other. This showed that the owners of the footprints, which were the guards, were in a state of running. Jinjin pondered and secretly speculated. These two guards took a fancy to this open space. There is no cover, and the view is very good. It is a good battlefield to deal with the wolf. He seemed to be replaying the scene in his mind. But when they were guarding here, they suddenly found the wolf running in the bushes. It seemed to want to bypass these guards to go after ZD. So these two guards were anxious. They had to give up the terrain and risk rushing into the bushes in an attempt to chase and obstruct the wolf. In the bushes, the two guards were one in front and one behind. The wolf was extremely fast. It suddenly turned around and counterattacked. It jumped up and directly bit through the head of one of the guards. Then it rushed to the guard behind and bit his throat. Jinjin combined the corpses and all kinds of traces and made a series of guesses. A chill spread from the bottom of his heart to the whole body. The blue wolf's temperament was cruel and fierce, but it was still so cunning. It seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. It used a combination of luring and counterattacking tactics. The execution of the tactic was also very simple and efficient. It quickly killed the two guards. During the whole process, it also used the terrain and the two guards' mentality to protect their master. Even when it turned around to attack and used a fatal attack, it was very strategic. Without a helmet, it directly used its fangs to crush the head. With a helmet, it bit the throat. The two guards' strength did not reach the level of Black Iron, but they were both bronze-ranked. They were not a match for a silver-ranked magical beast, but at least they should have caused some injuries to the wolf. However, when the guards finally sacrificed themselves, they did not make the wolf pay any price. Zhenjin sighed to ZD behind him. This blue wolf is definitely silver-ranked. The traces of battle were the best proof. The bite force and jumping ability of the wolf were obviously silver-ranked. Zhenjin sighed. The scariest thing is that it has shocking intelligence, completely surpassing normal magical beasts. Especially in the use of tactics, it is almost comparable to humans. Generally speaking, wolves hunt in packs and use pack tactics. Wolves that travel alone are defeated by the pack, or the old, weak, sick, or disabled. Only a fierce tiger will hide and slowly approach its prey. Then, it will suddenly attack and try to kill it in one shot. The wolf that chased us before was obviously not normal. The tactics it used were more sinister and ruthless than a fierce tiger. We were lucky to be able to get rid of it before. ZD nodded in agreement. Her face paled. I even suspected that the wolf had a human soul. The first time we came into contact with the wolf, it was the member at the back of the team who was attacked by it. It obviously had the ability to kill, but it only dragged the guard and ran, making us rush to rescue him. Our formation was messed up, and it took advantage of us. In the first battle, although we heavily injured it, it killed 3 guards. We suffered heavy losses, so of course we were very angry. But the wolf was a silver-ranked magical beast, and it had already disappeared without a trace. After we discussed, we decided to continue to search for you and temporarily give up on revenge. Many of us thought that this severely injured wolf would be eaten by other ferocious beasts in the forest. Even if it was still alive, it should have been hurt by us and would not dare to provoke us again. But the facts after told us that we were all wrong. Very wrong. The second time the wolf appeared was 6 days later. Its injuries had mostly healed, and it rushed directly to our camp in the evening. It brought a beehive, threw it into the camp, and immediately retreated. Then, a group of fire-poisonous bees attacked the whole camp. Those poisonous bees were not even afraid of smoke and fire, and had a strong fire poison. We finally repelled these poisonous bees, but 4 guards were stung, and their injuries were the most serious, and they all fell into a coma. Their bodies were hot, and I used all the methods I could think of, but I could not cool them down. In the middle of the night, they all died. After that, our team was attacked by the wolf again and again, and it became our death god, a nightmare that we could not get rid of, ZD said until here, hugging her arms. Her body was trembling slightly, and there was still a lot of lingering fear in her heart. Zhenjin looked at his fiancée, who was about to cry. She was so helpless. The young knight could not help but take a few steps forward, stretched out his arms, and took the initiative to take ZD into his arms. The girl's delicate body trembled, like a frightened rabbit returning to a warm nest. Soon, her emotions stabilized in Zhenjin's arms. Zhenjin gently patted the girl's back and lowered his head to see that the girl's face gradually revealed a shy expression. I can understand your feelings. Zhenjin said gently, Now, I am with you. Unless I fall, I will always protect you and stop any magic beast that hurts you. Lord Zhenjin, ZD's eyes revealed tenderness. The two of them continued to clean up the battlefield. Of the 2 dead guards, one was wearing leather armor, but it was already in tatters. The other was wearing a helmet and chainmail. Zhenjin first took the iron armor and replaced it with his own body. His original leather armor had just been pierced by the poisonous snake's centipede feet. Then, he took the iron chainmail and helmet and put them on himself. A sense of security suddenly arose spontaneously. To a certain extent, equipment could make up for the difference in life levels. For example, the blue-haired wolf didn't want to use its teeth to fight head-on with the helmet. As for the iron boots, because they were not suitable for the youth's feet, Jean abandoned them. In addition to protective equipment, there were also weapons. Of the two guards, one used a long sword, and the other used a scimitar. One side of the long sword was already broken, but the scimitar was in good condition. Jean first held the scimitar in his hand, and after waving it for a while, he frowned slightly. He put down the scimitar and picked up the long sword. Just as he was about to wave it, suddenly a memory was triggered, and it appeared in the youth's mind. Yesterday, the newly created official group was blocked, so please don't join the group for the time being. Old friends, you all know that reports and criticism have always been with us, and it has been like this since 6 or 7 years ago. No matter, the road ahead will not be short of thorns and hardships. Without resistance, how can it be called a journey? Tonight, I will discuss this matter with the management, and I will also appear in the original group. I am sorry, but I can't reply to all the private messages. A person's energy is too limited, but I can see everyone's encouragement and comfort, and I will remember it in my heart. Thank you. Chapter 5. The sky was gloomy, and it was drizzling. In a spacious training ground, a group of youths formed a circle, and Jean was lying on the ground, surrounded by the youths. The youths looked down at Jean, constantly laughing and mocking him. Their faces were full of disdain. The leading youth was tall and sturdy. He had a head of green hair that looked like steel needles that stood on his scalp. The green-haired youth crossed his arms and stepped on Jean's shoulder. Jean, remember this, your 100 Needles clan is only a viscount, a loser. You want to be on equal footing with us? The green-haired youth suddenly lifted his foot and stepped on Jean's head. He laughed nastily. Today, I'll teach you a lesson. From now on, whenever you see us, no matter where you are in the castle, you better lower your head, make way for us, and shrink to the side. Low-class nobles should act like low-class nobles. If I see you looking at me, Qin Kuei, on equal footing again, I'll cripple you. Do you understand? Qin Kuei roared and exerted force on his foot, directly crushing Jean's head into the mud. Ununderstood. Cough, cough, cough. Jean made a sound with difficulty. Ha ha. Qin Kuei raised his head and laughed complacently. He lifted his foot and left. Before he left behind a sentence. Of course, Jean, if you're not convinced, you can challenge me at any time. I, Qin Kuei, will be waiting for you at any time. Cough, cough, cough. Jean struggled to sit up. Because he had just opened his mouth to speak, the muddy water inevitably flowed back into his throat, causing him to cough again. Seeing him in such a sorry state, the youths all lost interest. Bah, who do you think you are? He wants to challenge young Master Qin Kuei? Why? Because of his embroidery needle. Ha ha. The rain was getting heavier. The youths clustered around Qin Kuei, letting out guffaws as they entered the castle. Jean sat in the mud, letting the rain fall on his body. He was covered in wounds, and his face was extremely pale. After being stunned for a moment, his gaze turned slightly and stared at a sword in the mud. That was his sword. It was a very thin rapier. The rapier was soaked in the muddy water, and it seemed to have lost its former sharpness. The memory came to an abrupt end. Jean returned to reality and couldn't help but frown. I'm a member of the 100 Needles clan. His territory seemed to be in the south. He was a southern noble who had joined the empire in the last 100 years. I think it used to be an earl's domain. About 100 years ago, in order to end the last war as soon as possible and unify the human world, the Shungming Emperor took the initiative to recruit the last remaining stubborn forces of the human race. These stubborn forces then became the new aristocrats of the Sacred Empire. However, the previous cruel war had caused these new nobles and the old nobles under the Shungming Emperor to form a deep grudge. Many of the friends and family of the two sides had died on the battlefield. Both sides were stained with the blood of each other's clansmen. Therefore, Zhang Jin, who represented the new aristocratic forces and joined the temple as a candidate for the Temple Knight, was naturally targeted and suppressed by the old aristocrats. Zhang Jin felt a little puzzled. This was a humiliating memory. At this moment, it reappeared in his mind, but didn't bring him anger or hatred. Strange, my mood is very calm, like a passerby watching. There's one more thing. He was more focused, not on the content of this memory, but on another question. Why did the memory appear? The memory appeared when I tried to use a long sword. It was also a weapon. When I tried to use a curved sword, the memory didn't appear. But when I grasped the hilt, it appeared. When I was by the river, the first memory I remembered was when I joined the temple and took the oath. At that time, it was the first time I heard the term Temple Knight from ZD. Zhang Jin recalled these two experiences and speculated. It seems that the key to reproducing the memory is to find a trigger point. This trigger point could be a word, or it could be an object, such as the sword now. Zhang Jin thought more deeply. He looked at the ordinary long sword in his hand and asked himself, if I am not holding a long sword, but a rapier, will more of my memory appear? If I want to activate my fighting aura, what kind of trigger point should I look for? Zhang Jin and ZD dug a hole together and buried the bodies of the two guards. The two of them continued their journey. With ZD guiding the way, the route was the exploration route they took before coming here. The two of them didn't dare to go deeper into the rainforest. It seemed that the deeper they went, the higher the chance of encountering a gold-ranked magical beast. Without the ability to activate their fighting aura and magic, the two of them were in a dangerous situation. Rather than explore aimlessly in an unfamiliar environment, it was better to go back the way they came. At the very least, the dangers along the way had either been resolved or discovered. Of course, there were also new changes like the bloodline centipede. But compared to the other routes, this was undoubtedly the safest choice. After trekking for a while, the sky gradually darkened. The young man and the young girl carefully chose a place and hastily arranged it. They were going to spend the night here. It was not difficult to gather dry branches and grass. Next to the pile of firewood, ZD half knelt on the ground, holding a piece of starfire stone in each hand. Ka. She used two pieces of starfire stone to collide with each other, quickly creating blue sparks. The sparks fell into the dry grass, turning into two orange-red dots. The orange-red color quickly spread on the dry grass, and soon it was burning. First, there was a faint smoke, rising in spirals. ZD hurriedly put away the starfire stone, puffed up her small mouth, and blew out a gentle breeze. Under the influence of the gentle breeze, the fire in the dry grass quickly spread. The light smoke turned into thick smoke, and then the flames rose, turning into a fist-sized flame. It's done. ZD's face lit up with joy. She immediately stood up and took a few steps back. In just a short while, the flame completely spread, burning fiercely, and turned into a bonfire. ZD carefully put away the two starfire stones. In the past, if she wanted to start a fire, she would only need to snap her fingers to create a small flame. This was one of the magician's tricks. But on this island, black iron level magic could not be used at all. It was strictly forbidden. Instead, the starfire stone, a common method of starting a fire, had more practical value. Without these starfire stones, it would be quite troublesome to start a fire with bare hands. The burning bonfire brought warmth and light, driving away the darkness of the night. There was no barbecue on the bonfire. The young man and the young girl sat around the bonfire, nibbling on dry rations and drinking water. Whether it was the starfire stones, dry rations, or water, they were all plundered from the corpses of the two guards. Although the dry rations were hard to swallow, under these circumstances, there was nothing to be picky about. This day's trekking was full of thrills. To be able to keep their lives in front of gold, silver, and other magical beasts, and to obtain a certain amount of equipment, as well as sufficient food and water, the two of them felt incomparably lucky. What else could they ask for? After eating and drinking to their heart's content, the young man and the young girl carefully tidied up and stored the remaining food and water away. Jun calculated and frowned slightly. According to the current food and water, it will only last us for 2 days. Both the young girl and the young man had a much larger appetite than ordinary people, especially Jun. His appetite was more than 3 times that of ZD's. This was not strange. ZD practiced magic, and her life level had leaped to black iron level. And Jun was very likely to have a silver level cultivation level. The higher the life level, the greater the appetite, and the higher the requirement for external nutrients. ZD estimated. Next, if we go back the way we came, it will take us another 7 days to get out of the rainforest. But it doesn't matter, we brought enough supplies on the way here, and set up a few campsites along the way. Some of the campsites still have some supplies. If nothing unexpected happens, there should be no problem with food. Jun nodded. Only then was he relieved. He took out his long sword and wiped the blade with an oilcloth. Weapons needed to be maintained. Although the long sword was ordinary, it gave Jun a tangible sense of security. Unfortunately, there are no crossbows. Crossbows were prohibited for civilians, but Jun and the others were originally going to White Sand City, so they were equipped with this kind of weapon. According to ZD, the exploration team that came to search for Jun was originally equipped with 5 crossbows. But along the way, they suffered a series of losses. After the Blue Wolf suffered a loss from the crossbows for the first time, it began to deliberately target them. After biting most of the crossbowmen to death, it also directly chewed the crossbows. Seeing that Jun had finished wiping the longsword, ZD walked over. "Sir, let me check your wound." Jun nodded. After removing the bandage, he found that the wound on his arm had mostly healed. The medicine is not bad. Jun was not stingy with his praise. At this moment, he was sitting on a rock, while ZD was half kneeling on the ground. The young girl first took out the powder from the leather bag at her waist and evenly sprinkled it on the wound, then took out a new bandage and gently wrapped it around Jun. Finally, ZD put on the arm guard for Jun. ZD's gaze fell on the arm guard and sighed. "If you had this iron arm guard, sir, you would not have been injured by the blood snake." The light of the fire shone on the arm guard, reflecting a blurry orange light, and also fell on the ends of ZD's hair. ZD's black hair, under the light of the fire, shone with a layer of halo. Her wheat-colored skin had the unique tenderness of a young girl. At this moment, there seemed to be a pure body fragrance through the light of the fire, transmitted to Jun's heart. Jun could not help but feel a little moved. He could not help but reach out and stroke ZD's hair. ZD trembled slightly. My lord." ZD lowered her head, as if she was frightened by Jun's action. She nervously held her breath like a kitten. Jun's mind was not on the matter of love. He quickly withdrew his hand and asked indifferently, "ZD, what kind of person do you think I am?" As the young man asked, the memory from before lingered in his mind. After this second memory appeared, he had actually been secretly pondering and reflecting on it. As a holy knight, but as a noble from the south, being ostracized by his peers is a definite thing. But must I be the coward in your memory? No, not necessarily. Jun felt that there were other possibilities. These days, he had been getting to know himself. Memory was only one of the bases he used to judge himself. Other than that, there were other strong bases. For example, when Jun was awakened, as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw the blue wolf leaping into the air. In an instant, he did not even think and completed his attack. In the end, although he unintentionally contributed to the death of the blue wolf, it also revealed Jun's solid and profound combat skills. Then, he saw the lava giant turtle. Facing a powerful gold-level life form, Jun found that he always remained calm. Although he was very nervous, there was not a trace of panic. Later, he found the bodyguard's body. He carefully searched the body. He was calm. There was no disgust or disgust, as if it was a common occurrence. This was perhaps the proof of his long experience in battle and tempering. At least, a rookie on the battlefield would not have such a reaction. Also, according to the traces, He could easily deduce the scene of the battle between the wolf and the bodyguard. Even he himself was surprised by this ability. In my memory, facing Qin Kuei's provocation, I did not resist. There are basically two possibilities. The first possibility is that I was really weak, but later on, I worked hard and grew. The second possibility is that I showed weakness. Zhen Jin felt that the second possibility was more likely, because when this memory surfaced, his mood was very calm, even somewhat indifferent. If it was really a memory of being humiliated, there should be some anger and hatred left in his heart, right? Facing Zhen Jin's question, ZD muttered to herself for a moment. After carefully considering her words, she replied, Lord Jinjin, I actually do not know much about you. But according to the rumors, sir, you usually do not get close to women. You are a lone wolf. Even if you encounter something big, you will not easily reveal your emotions. You spend most of your time in the temple, your expression is solemn, and you are silent. But your food, clothing, housing, and every movement are elegant and calm, full of the demeanor of a noble. Although you have few friends, you are willing to help others, especially the weak, and help the poor. So, sir, you have always had a good reputation among the lower class. Also, sir, you suddenly made a move this time, successfully joining the competition for the position of Lord of White Sand City, which seems to have surprised the other temple knights. Oh, hearing this, Zhen Jin could not help but raise his eyebrows. ZD's answer quickly outlined the image of a shrewd youth in his mind. But what surprised the youth was that ZD did not have a deep understanding of Zhen Jin's situation. What's going on? Isn't she my fiancée? If we do not have deep feelings for each other, why would she not leave me? What is the relationship between her and me? Zhen Jin was about to continue asking, when suddenly, a buzzing sound could be heard. The two of them immediately turned their heads and saw that in the forest under the curtain of night, hundreds of thousands of flames had suddenly lit up. These flames gathered into a group and swarmed toward Zhen Jin and ZD aggressively. What is this? Zhen Jin quickly got up and stood in front of ZD, his expression very serious. A small portion of the flames emitted a bronze-ranked life force. This is... ZD saw the true identity of the flames, and her face immediately turned pale. These are fire-poison bees, sir. Run quickly. I'll cover you. ZD's face was full of determination as she stepped forward, protecting Zhen Jin behind her. Run, sir, ZD shouted, very urgent, and actually showed the will to die. Sorry, today's update was a little late. Yesterday, I discussed with the management and came up with a plan, and tomorrow I will announce the new book in the new group. Last night, I spent more than 2 hours communicating with the friends in the group and answered some questions. But there are still many groups that I did not go to. This morning, I received a message from the management saying that some groups waited for an hour last night, but I did not come. I hereby bow and apologize. A person's energy is really too limited. This week, I will take out another time to communicate, and will start to improve the activity mechanism. Chapter 6. Zhen Jin's counterattack was very effective. He killed many of the poisonous bees, but at the same time attracted even more of them. The poisonous bees kept coming. After hundreds of stabs, Zhen Jin felt sore in his muscles. After thousands of stabs, the soreness turned into a swelling pain. In Zhen Jin's illusion, the arm he used to wield the sword seemed to have swelled up. The sword in his hand also became heavier. Buzz, 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 the poisonous bees seemed to be endless. They were enraged by the casualties and flew out of the bonfire. The swarm rushed over like a tsunami, trying to drown the young man and girl. Damn it! Zhen Jin cursed and waved the sword with all his strength. The sword was now several times heavier. Zhen Jin knew that this was a sign that his physical strength had reached its limit. He was sweating profusely and his head was dizzy. The arm he used to wield the sword was almost not his anymore. His muscles were numb, and every stab caused a piercing pain in his bones. It was like a rusty gear that had not been repaired for a long time, but still had to work. One by one, the poisonous bees stung Zhen Jin. Under such an attack, the chainmail's defensive effect was minimal. Zhenjin gritted his teeth and kept in mind that ZD was behind him. In order to protect his fiancée, he had not retreated a single step since the start of the battle. He held the sword in one hand and groped his body with the other, pulling out the poisonous bees that had stabbed him and were still struggling. These poisonous bees died as a result and were casually thrown to the ground by Zhenjin. Sir. ZD's sobs came from behind him. Not a single poisonous bee attacked her. Perhaps it was because Zhenjin had completely angered the poisonous bees. A large number of venomous fire bees even abandoned the burning bonfire to deal with needle gold. At the same time, perhaps it was because Zhenjin's vigorous exercise, the heat he emitted was much higher than ZD's. Zhenjin felt that time was slow and unbearable. Finally, his vision cleared and there were no more poisonous bees in front of him. The ground was littered with the corpses of the fire-poisoned bees. He had won. Zhenjin loosened his grip on the sword in his hand, and the tip of the sword almost stabbed into his foot. Numbness was Zhenjin's greatest feeling. But soon, the wounds caused by the poisonous fire bees caused a burning pain all over his body. As for his right arm, it was as if it didn't exist. He had almost lost all feeling in it. "Sir, be careful," ZD cried out in alarm. This scream stimulated Zhenjin, causing his numb mind to suddenly sober up. When the bonfire was almost extinguished, more than a dozen poisonous fire bees flew out of the bonfire and attacked again. There was still the last batch of fire-poison wasps left. However, I don't have the strength to fight anymore. Zhenjin smiled bitterly. He was very clear about his own condition. He was well aware that if these venomous fire wasps had attacked him together, he might have had the ability to deal with them. But now that he had loosened his grip, he could not even pick up the sword in his hand. Although he did not feel anything now, Zhenjin knew that the poison of the venomous fire bees had spread throughout his body. There seemed to be a voice in his heart telling him that if he continued to fight recklessly, he would most likely pay with his life. This was the strong intuition of a warrior. Zhenjin valued this feeling and knew that he could not continue to fight recklessly. "Let's run." Zhenjin gritted his teeth and sighed. He turned around and grabbed ZD's hand and quickly ran away. The young man and the young woman ran hand in hand, plunging into the dark forest. They had no choice but to run. If they stayed, they would only lose their lives to the poisonous stingers of the venomous fire bees. But if they ran, although it was very dangerous, they still had a glimmer of hope. "I will not give up until the last moment." Zhenjin's gaze was resolute, and his fighting spirit did not decrease in the slightest. ZD, who was behind him, was dragged along by Zhenjin. Soon, she staggered and could not keep up with his pace. Even if Zhenjin's physical strength was at rock bottom, ZD was still just a magician. "Sir, let me stay behind. I will lead them away." ZD's tone was hurried. "Shut up." Zhenjin stopped abruptly and turned around to face ZD. The young woman cried out in surprise and crashed into Zhenjin's arms due to inertia. The next moment, the young woman's world spun, and her vision changed drastically. When she came back to her senses, she realized that she was already in Zhenjin's arms, and they were running wildly. Restless sounds came from all directions in the dark forest because of the young man and woman's reckless charge. Zhenjin tried to shake off the venomous fire bees, but the buzzing bees continued to approach. Even at the moment of life and death, the young man still maintained his rationality. Originally, the most direct way to deal with the bees was to jump into the water and let the bees know the difficulty and retreat. But they knew that there were python vines lurking in the rivers, and jumping into the water was practically suicide. Zhenjin could only run along the path he took during the day, trying to increase the distance between them. This was the best choice in desperation. However, his vision was greatly hindered in the dark, and he could barely distinguish the direction. He could only rely on the vague memories in his mind to guide him. After almost hitting the tree trunk for the third time, ZD took out a potion with difficulty from the small leather bag at her waist. This potion was stored in a glass bottle, and it emitted a light like a firefly. With this light, Jean was finally able to distinguish the path. The forest was dense with branches and tangled roots. Trudging through it was very difficult, not to mention running wildly. Most of the time, the bushes and ferns almost formed a wall. Jean hugged ZD and ran straight into the wall. He felt that the entire forest was emitting a strong malice, and millions of tentacles were reaching out to him, blocking his way from all directions. He used all his strength to break every vine and let the thorns scratch his clothes and skin in the dark. The only thing that made Jean feel fortunate was that the path had been trampled and had been cleared during the day. Otherwise, it would be impossible to move so quickly in the forest. ZD took out potions and threw them at the venomous fire bees. Sometimes the venomous fire bees were attracted and slowed down slightly, but most of the time, there was no effect at all. Oh no! Jean, who was running, sank to the bottom of the valley. He found that his surroundings were becoming more and more unfamiliar, and he knew that he had stepped into an unfamiliar territory. But there was no other way. The venomous fire bees were chasing after him. How could Jean stand still and find the right direction? He could only run wildly. He did not know how far he had run. Roar! Suddenly, a ferocious beast pounced from the bushes. What is that? Jean seemed to have seen a black panther. A strong wind with the smell of blood of a predator hit him in the face. At the critical moment, he was lucky enough to dodge it. He did not look back and continued to run wildly. The venomous fire bees behind him flew over and tangled with the black panther. Soon, the black panther was no match for it. It roared and retreated. Jean pulled away from the venomous fire bees because of this. But the venomous fire bees hated Jean to the core and did not have any intention of giving up. In the following chase, they shortened the distance again and got closer to the young boy and girl. Jean's stamina was gradually pushed to the limit. His legs were as heavy as lead. He had the will, but lacked the strength. His speed began to slow down. The terrain changed and slowly rose. With the help of the light from the potions, a bottomless cliff appeared in front of the two of them. In the process of running, they had lost the right direction and stepped into an unfamiliar territory. The venomous fire bees were approaching from the left. There's a cave there. There's light. ZD suddenly said. The cave was emitting an orange light. Although it was very weak, it seemed that someone was living there. Jean panted heavily. His eyes suddenly lit up. He carried ZD and plunged into the cave. As soon as they entered the cave, a scorching aura hit them in the face. There were no signs of human activity in the cave. It was a unique or that was emitting light. This ore was red and emitted a large amount of heat, as well as a faint orange light. The ore at the entrance of the cave was rare and small. But the deeper they went into the cave, the more of this ore there was, and the bigger the ore became. After a few hundred steps, Jean felt as if he had entered a furnace. ZD was already sweating profusely. It was no longer suitable for them to move forward. The air in the cave was scorching hot, as if it was going to steam them directly. But the venomous fire bees chasing them also flew into the cave, like the Grim Reaper approaching. Jean put ZD down. The two of them were forced by the bee swarm. They had no choice but to grit their teeth and continue going deeper into the cave. Here, the pursuit of life and death had reached its final stage. Jean's hope rose. Although he had no way to deal with the venomous fire bees, by relying on the special terrain here, he might be able to make them lose their target. As far as he knew, the venomous fire bees targeted their enemies based on heat. The higher the heat, the more likely it was to attract the venomous fire bees' attack. The future was dark, but there was still a glimmer of light struggling. The boy and girl gritted their teeth and pushed their bodies to their limits. They staggered forward step by step in the cave. The cave began to narrow. Scorching hot ores almost covered the walls of the cave, forming a bright red color. They could not touch the walls at all. It was too hot. There are traces of wild beasts here, ZD suddenly said in a low voice. Jean looked in the direction where the girl was pointing and saw traces of sharp claws on the walls of the cave. Wild beasts that could survive in such an extreme environment were definitely not simple. Zhun Jin's head sank, but he immediately shook his head and smiled bitterly. What wild beast could he be worried about right now? He had no other choice. After the venomous fire bees entered the cave, they might have been distracted by the oars and often lay on the oars to absorb the heat, but they did not give up. They continued to follow behind them. With their future uncertain, the boy and girl could only brace themselves and move forward. Suddenly, Zhun Jin's body swayed. Then, a strong wave of dizziness attacked his body and mind, and he almost fainted on the spot. This is bad. Zhun Jin staggered. His entire field of vision began to shake, as if there was an earthquake. He could barely stand. The fire poison was acting up. Zhun Jin had no choice but to extend his hand to support himself on the walls of the cave. Asterisk sizzle. Asterisk the walls of the cave burned his leather gloves, and a burst of black smoke quickly rose. At the same time, a foul stench spread out from Zhun Jin's body. The foul stench instantly caused the venomous fire bees behind them to become agitated. They immediately gave up on the oars and threw away their previous swaying and careless attitude. They charged at Zhun Jin with a murderous intent. Zidi's face instantly turned pale, without a trace of blood. She suddenly understood. While the venomous fire bees chased after objects with high temperatures to absorb heat, they also used the smell of the fire poison to lock down their enemies. When the fire poison acted up, the unique stench would completely stimulate the ferocity of the venomous fire bees. Zhun Jin's body contained a large amount of fire poison, which meant that a large number of venomous fire bees had died in his hands. Such a powerful enemy would naturally trigger the violent attacks of the venomous fire bees. Zidi turned pale with fright. She hurriedly took out a potion and poured it on Zhun Jin's body in an attempt to cover up the stench of the fire poison. It immediately worked. The venomous fire bees' murderous intent suddenly disappeared, and they were attracted by the boiling hot rocks in the cave. Quick! This potion can only last for a short while. Zidi placed Zhun Jin's arm on her shoulder and used her delicate body to drag Zhun Jin forward. After barely taking a few steps, Zhun Jin felt that the world was spinning, and he completely lost his sense of direction. It was truly difficult for him to move. The fire poison made his entire body hot, and he felt as if there was a giant bell ringing in his head. He relied on the last trace of clarity left in his mind and said weakly to ZD, "Go quickly." The young girl was not poisoned by the fire poison. In this cave, the venomous fire bee's target was only Zhun Jin. If ZD ran now, it was indeed possible for her to escape. But the young girl fiercely shook her head, and tears flashed in her eyes. She said with a sobbing tone, "No, master, I will never leave you. I finally found you, and we finally came to this step. How can I give up?" Zhun Jin sighed, and suddenly pushed ZD away. "Go quickly." "No, master." As the two pulled, they fell to the ground together. The venomous fire bees had already flown above them. Death had arrived at this moment. ZD closed her eyes tightly, but Zhun Jin angrily stared at the venomous fire bees. He fell to the ground and did not have the strength to get up. He looked on helplessly as the venomous fire bees flew down, and when they were only a finger's distance away from his face, roar. Suddenly, a beastly roar came from the cave. The roar reverberated in the cave, and the venomous fire bees suddenly scattered. They were greatly frightened. As if they were drunk, they danced in the air and even collided with each other. Dong, dong, dong. Following that, a series of rapid sounds, like a war drum being beaten crazily by a strong man. A monster was galloping through the cave. It carried a strong wind, and its figure was so fast that it left a huge black shadow in the eyes of the young boy and girl. The mysterious monster in the cave pounced on the venomous fire bees. The arrogant and ferocious venomous fire bees were actually chased away by the monster and began to flee in panic. The monster chased after them, and the two quickly left the cave. The cave quickly quieted down. The young boy and girl lay on the ground, panting as they looked at the cave ceiling and were in a daze. Chapter 7. In the mine, the young boy and girl's faces were full of disbelief. They were actually still alive. ZD was the first to stand up. She saw the footprints on the ground. Every time the ferocious monster in the cave stomped, a shallow pit would be formed on the ground. The beast's physique and ferocity were immediately evident. It was extremely lucky that it didn't step on a young boy and girl. Sir, ZD tried to help Jinjin up. However, Jin's weight, coupled with his armor, was not something a delicate mage like ZD could easily move. In the end, ZD could only drag Jinjin for a short distance, letting the youth half lean against the cave wall. Jinjin was in a very bad state at this time. When ZD touched him, she found that his body was very hot, just like the strange ores in the cave. The effect of the potion had disappeared, and the stench coming from Jin's body seemed to be even stronger than before, almost suffocating ZD. Jinjin said weakly, "Go, ZD, let's leave here." He couldn't even shake his head now. A gentle shake of his head could make him completely faint. Jinjin raised his hand and looked at his arm. Several phantoms of arms appeared in his vision. His whole skin had become red and swollen. His whole body seemed to have expanded, and his body temperature was very high. His eyelids began to swell, and his vision was seriously affected. ZD noticed this situation as if she had fallen into the sea of despair and was almost drowning. She knew the power of the fire poison. The members of the exploration team had died from the fire poison. These unfortunate people were tortured before they died. When they died, their eyes were swollen high, and not even a slit could be left. Their throats and nasal cavities were also extremely swollen, and it was extremely difficult for them to breathe. The cause of death was suffocation. Jinjin was a silver-level life form, but he still couldn't resist the fire poison. The fire poison in his body had accumulated too much. The savagery of the venomous fire bees was truly frightening. Faced with Jin's repeated attempts to drive her away, ZD shook her head. "I won't leave. I won't give up. My lord, I can concoct the potion. I can definitely concoct the correct potion. We still have hope. Please don't give up." Jin's vision began to blur. It was as if his eyelids and eyeballs were stuck together with sticky glue. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't open his eyes. In his blurred vision, he saw ZD crying. She sat on the ground and took out several bottles of medicine from the small leather bag on her waist. She poured the potion on the ground, and it quickly corroded a small round hole in the ground. After that, she began to concoct the potion. She mixed several potions together and took out many dried leaves and roots from her bosom. She first crushed them into powder and then poured them into the pit. Gurgle, gurgle. The mixture of potions in the pit began to bubble. ZD stared intently at the potion. She continued to concoct the potion and occasionally wiped her eyes. It seemed that the potion was stinging her eyes. Jinjin wanted to persuade her again, but after a few breaths, he found that he had lost the ability to speak. His throat felt like it was on fire. It was so swollen that it was difficult for him to swallow. His tongue was so numb that he couldn't feel it at all. It was as if he didn't have a human organ. Soon, his consciousness began to slack. After that, Jinjin was in a half-awake state. He lost the ability to sense anything that was happening around him. While he was in a daze, he felt a cool liquid slide down his throat from his mouth. His throat was like a block of stones that were tightly piled together. But under the nourishment of the cool liquid, these stones quickly melted, and soon a smooth path was formed. The cool liquid entered deep into Jin's body and gradually spread. His consciousness began to return to Jin's body. Jinjin opened his eyes and saw ZD's blurry figure. She was almost sticking to his body. The young girl's hands were covered in potions. She smeared them all over Jin's body. Jinjin was wearing chainmail. But because of the fire poison in his body, his skin was swollen and the chainmail was very tight. With the help of the potion, the red and swollen skin seemed to be deflated and quickly shriveled. What followed was a bone-piercing chill. It even made Jinjin shiver on the spot. The temperature in the cave was very high. ZD was busy for a while. Soon, she was drenched in sweat. Her originally loose robe was stuck to her body because of her sweat. After applying the potion, the young girl's pair of purple eyes shone brightly. She stared at Jinjin without blinking. Her eyes were full of anticipation. Jinjin was like a drowning person. After being rescued by someone, he patted the water out of his chest. He opened his mouth and breathed in deeply. When the hot air entered his body, he felt a kind of happiness like rain after a long drought. Gradually coming back to his senses, Jinjin found that his mouth was open and saliva was flowing out. His saliva had already flowed all over the ground. ZD could clearly see that Jinjin's body was rapidly reducing the swelling. His condition was improving very obviously. "Sir, you're awake." Seeing that Jinjin's eyes were completely clear, ZD was pleasantly surprised. To be honest, she was not very confident in concocting the potion. "How long have I been unconscious?" Jinjin asked. "Only a few minutes." ZD immediately replied. Jinjin immediately relaxed. "Let's quickly leave this cave." Without a doubt, this was a dangerous place. Previously, the fire poison bees had fled in panic. It was very likely that the monsters in the cave had won. Once they returned to their nest, the young boy and girl would become the monster's meal. Continuing to go deeper into the cave was very risky. Who knew if there were other forks in this path? If there weren't, this was a completely dead end. ZD dragged Jinjin up. Jinjin supported himself against the cave wall and stood up. The cave wall was scalding hot. A burnt smell came from the gloves, but Jinjin was very happy, because whether it was the scalding hot feeling or the burnt smell, they were all normal sensations of the human body. Previously, he could not feel it. What made Jinjin feel even more surprised was that he felt a surge of energy in his body, and this energy was getting stronger and stronger. Seeing Jinjin's doubtful expression, ZD explained with a frightened and guilty expression, "Sir, I'm sorry. I added a lot of berserk potion into the potion." After drinking the berserk potion, it could temporarily stimulate a large amount of potential in the body, increasing one's battle strength by a large margin. However, the side effects were also very serious. It could be said that it was very harmful to the human body. "You did the right thing. Don't blame yourself." Jinjin patted the young girl's shoulder to ease her uneasiness. "Let's go quickly," Jinjin urged, and tried to walk on his own. His head was still dizzy, but it was much better. Jinjin immediately realized that he could walk and even run on his own. The energy in his body was getting stronger and stronger. Jinjin even felt that the chain mail was a little light. "It seems that the berserk potion has fully stimulated my life potential. However, once the time limit is reached and the potion's effect is over, what will happen?" This huge hidden danger filled Jinjin's head with haze. Under normal circumstances, once the berserk potion's effect was over, the person would fall into an extremely weak state. Jinjin was already poisoned by the fire poison. ZD's potion was hastily concocted and did not really solve the fire poison. It relied more on the combination of the berserk potion and other potions to make Jinjin's life force explode and resist the fire poison. "No matter what, I have to take this opportunity to escape from danger. Even if I can't escape, I have to try my best to save ZD." Jinjin had already sprouted the will to die. The time he was awake was very short, and his memory was also very fragmented, but he knew, ZD is my fiancée. Our relationship seems to be a little complicated, and there may be secrets, but she was always by my side and never left me. She was even willing to sacrifice her own life for me, no matter how big the risk was. How can I repay such a young girl? As a knight, I can't even protect my fiancée. Jinjin secretly swore that he would do everything he could to protect the young girl. The two of them held hands and ran in the cave. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the cave. The roars of wild beasts fighting could be heard from outside. The battle outside the cave was extremely intense. Jinjin and ZD were a little bewildered. After looking at each other, they quietly approached the entrance of the cave and peeked outside. The swarm of fire-poisoned bees had long disappeared. The battle now was between two other parties. One party was the monster that ran out of the cave and drove away the swarm of fire-poison bees. This monster had a thick body like a brown bear, but it had the pink tail of a monkey. It stood on two legs like a human, but its upper limbs were not bear claws. Instead, they were like the hands of a gorilla. Each of its hands had 4 fingers, and the nails were sharp and black. They were very long and had a texture like black iron. The other party was a beast like a black panther, but they did not have fur, and their bodies were covered with scales. Not only that, they also had a single horn on their forehead. It was shaped like a rhinoceros horn, but it was very sharp. There was only one monkey-tail brown bear, but there were more than a dozen black panthers with scales. Judging from their auras, the monkey-tail brown bear was a silver-level magical beast. Most of the black panthers were bronze-level magical beasts. Only the leader and a few others had the aura of an iron-level life form. The leopard surrounded the brown bear in the center, and both sides began to fight. The brown bear was strong, and the black panther alone was no match for it. When the black panther pounced, it was almost always slapped back by the brown bear. But the black panther quickly stood up. Obviously, the panther's body was tough and strong, and could withstand such a heavy blow. Seeing that the two parties were in a deadlock, Zhenjin and ZD looked at each other and saw the deep worry in each other's eyes. If they rushed out rashly, they might be surrounded by the leopards and torn to pieces. Sir, if there's a chance, you should rush out. Don't worry about me, ZD said softly. Zhenjin shook his head. He did not have the time to refute his fiancée. Even he himself did not have much confidence in rushing out of the encirclement of the beasts. What was worse was that he had to escape with ZD. This was too difficult. Moreover, Zhenjin's condition was also full of worries. Once the effect of the medicine was over, the suppressed fire poison would act up again, and it would be a huge threat to Zhenjin's life. What should he do? If only I had Do Qi, I could use Do Qi. Zhenjin felt depressed and distressed. He had a weapon hidden in his body, but he could not use it. Chapter 8. There was no chance at all. Zhenjin and ZD hid near the entrance of the cave, paying attention to the battle outside the cave. Throughout the entire process, the horned black panthers were busy but not chaotic, firmly encircling the monkey-tailed brown bear in the center. Once the boy and girl left the cave, they would be exposed to the eyes of these wild beasts. If they took the risk and rushed out, the chances of survival were very low. Unless it was a last resort, the two of them would never do such a thing. The more Zhenjin watched, the more alarmed he became. In the battle between the two sides, the horned black panthers were still slightly superior. They had a lot of numbers. Although leopards don't travel alone, they often live and reproduce in the form of family groups. So many leopards hunting in a group is simply unprecedented. On this island, not only do the forms of life have terrifying mutations, but their habits have also changed greatly. Zhenjin also had guesses about the origin of these horned black panthers. He remembered that when they were being chased by the poisonous fire bees, they were attacked by a mysterious panther-like beast on the way. In the end, this wild beast was forced to flee in panic under the pressure of the poisonous fire bees. This wild beast was very likely a horned black panther. After it was defeated, it probably returned to its tribe and contacted the other black panthers. It followed the scent of Zhenjin and ZD's escape and finally came here. Rather than saying that these black panthers are taking revenge on the poisonous fire bees, it's more likely that they're hunting me and ZD. If that's the case, this monkey-tailed brown bear blocked a disaster for the two of us. However, Zhenjin was not grateful at all. The monkey-tailed brown bear first chased away the poisonous fire bees and now fought with the black panthers, fighting for a chance of survival for Zhenjin and ZD. However, if it won and returned to its nest, it would still attack the young boy and girl. All of this was just a coincidence. Roar! The black panther leader suddenly pounced on the brown bear's back, opened its mouth, and bit the brown bear's neck. The monkey-tailed brown bear was furious and shook its body crazily. However, the black panther leader gritted its teeth, and its body was almost flung away. It could only bite the brown bear's neck tightly with its teeth. The brown bear had fat skin and flesh, so it was bleeding profusely for a while. It stretched out two gorilla-like claws. Its sharp nails pierced through the scales and pierced deeply into the Black Panther leader's body. The black leopard leader refused to let go. At the same time, the other black leopards also pounced forward. One by one, the Black Panthers pounced on the brown bear, pressing it to the ground. "This is our chance." Seeing this, Jean made a prompt decision and immediately dragged ZD out of the cave. However, at this moment, the remaining black leopards saw them. One of them immediately roared and pounced at the two of them. The other beasts were also getting restless. Jean and ZD were forced back into the cave by the panther. The Black Panther didn't chase him into the cave because the brown monkey bear had exploded. Its claws emitted a boiling hot aura, and its black iron-like sharp nails turned red, like steel being roasted in a furnace. The brown bear rolled on the ground frantically, shaking off most of the Black Panthers on its body. Then, his two sharp claws pierced fiercely into the depths of the Black Panther leader's body. As the Black Panther struggled crazily, large amounts of blood spewed out from its mouth and nose. Chi! In the next moment, the brown monkey bear brazenly tore the Black Panther leader in half. Its sharp claws turned red and emitted a scorching aura, as if steel had been tempered in a furnace and was immediately taken out. The red iron-like claws could easily pierce through the Black Panther scales. Under the brown bear's huge strength, it became a killing weapon. In an instant, nearly 10 Black Panthers were slaughtered and died on the spot. The leopard pack collapsed and suffered heavy losses. Although the brown monkey bear was the final victor, it was also very miserable. Its right eye had already been scratched blind, and its entire body was covered in wounds and dripping with blood. The few wounds on its legs and arms were even deeper, and bones could be seen. The most serious wound was on its neck. This was where the Black Panther leader's mouth was. The wound was very deep, and it seemed to have bitten through an artery. Now, bright red blood was constantly flowing out of the wound. The brown monkey bear was so heavily injured that it did not chase after the leopards after repelling them. Instead, it immediately walked back to the cave. There was no other way. Jean and ZD could only retreat continuously. An injured, ferocious beast was often even more terrifying. Fortunately, the brown bear was seriously injured and did not run. It walked back to the cave at a slow speed. The youth and girl were forced deeper into the cave. If there was only one path in the cave, they would still have to meet the brown bear in the end and fight. However, Jean was not confident. He originally had a long sword, but he lost it at the bonfire. The only sharp weapons on him now were 2 daggers. One was with him, and the other was in ZD's hands. The youth and girl retreated again and again. For the two of them, the best situation was that there was still a fork in the cave. However, an unexpected situation happened. The brown monkey-tailed bear stopped halfway through the path. It stopped and used its sharp claws to dig out the ores on the cave wall. It opened its mouth and kept swallowing. It was eating these hot ores. Jean secretly observed, and his pupils shrank. He was surprised to find that after the brown monkey bear swallowed more than a dozen ores, its wounds gradually stopped bleeding. The brown bear's originally weak and scattered breath also gradually stabilized. Jean completely understood. So these ores are the brown monkey bear's food. He had found many claw marks on the cave wall and thought that the brown monkey bear had sharpened its claws. Now it seemed that there were traces left by the brown bear. The brown monkey bear's condition was rapidly improving. Jean and ZD looked at each other and saw that the other's face had become very serious. They had 2 choices now. One was to continue retreating and find a fork in the cave to avoid the brown monkey bear. The second choice was to fight with the brown monkey bear, take advantage of the enemy's illness to kill it. Both choices had considerable risks. The first choice was to give up the opportunity at hand and let the brown monkey bear rest smoothly. Once there was no fork, they would still have to fight with the brown monkey bear. The second choice was to fight with the brown bear. Jinjin had no confidence in the outcome of the battle. Although it was true that they seized the opportunity, if there was a fork in the cave and he finally died in the brown bear's hands, wouldn't that be too unfair? ZD suddenly held Jinjin's hand. She did not speak, but her beautiful purple eyes had already revealed her intention. Everything was up to Jinjin. For a time, Jinjin was caught in a dilemma. This was a choice of life and death. The key point was that it was not only about his own life and death, but also the life of his fiancée ZD. The heavy responsibility was on Jinjin's shoulders. Jinjin's eyes flickered for a while and soon revealed a determined light. He held ZD's hand and then let go. He pulled out his dagger and slowly moved closer to the brown monkey bear that was eating. Jinjin had no confidence in either choice. There was also no reliable information that could help him make a decision. So he followed his natural choice. He preferred to fight and try to grab fate by the throat. Even if he did not have a long sword in his hand and only had short dagger, he was getting closer and closer. The distance between Jinjin and the brown bear was getting closer and closer. The brown bear was still eating, perhaps because it had returned to its nest, or perhaps because it was in a bad state after the fierce battle. It seemed to be unaware of the approaching Jinjin. But this time, Jinjin's face suddenly changed. A memory emerged in his mind. Damn it! At this critical moment, Jinjin weakly cursed in his heart, but he could only temporarily immerse himself in the flash of memory. In an old tavern, the lights were dim and the voices were noisy. We won. Drink up. Jinjin found himself sitting in the corner, surrounded by knights wearing shining armor. Of course, he was also one of them. This group of knights had new wounds on their armor, capes, and bodies, but everyone was excited. It seemed that this was a celebration after the battle. Hurrah! Someone cheered. I don't think there is anything in this world that can stop us Temple Knights. Now that I think about it, the battle just now was very dangerous. Someone sighed. Someone stroked his wine glass and said with a voice full of fear, I almost lost control of my mount. The Temple Knights' sighs were met with a sneer. What kind of danger is that? Little bastards, you are too inexperienced. A voice was heard, attracting the attention of Jinjin and the rest of the Temple Knights. The one who spoke was an old man. He had a white beard and a majestic body. He was also wearing the armor of a Temple Knight, but the gold and silver carvings were clearly different from the knights around him. It was more gorgeous and dignified. The Temple Knights didn't refute him, but looked at this old man with reverence. The originally lively and noisy tavern quickly quieted down until there was no sound. Captain, tell us about it. I know that you have participated in many battles, such as attacking the Iron Flag Castle, encircling and suppressing the Blood Knights, and defending Griffin Cliff. What do you think was the most difficult battle? Someone asked. The old captain chuckled and did not say anything. Instead, he raised his head and drank all the beer in the barrel. Just as he put down the cup, a Temple Knight beside him brought another full cup to him. The old captain reached out and held the cup. This time, he did not gulp it down. He only took a small sip, almost drinking all the beer foam in the cup into his stomach. Under the illumination of the fire, his remaining eye revealed a look of reminiscence. He said, the most difficult battle is the one 6 years ago in Lupus Valley. I know, it was the Battle of the Frost Knights. Someone said excitedly. There were also many people who looked at Jinjin with sharp gazes. The old captain nodded and continued. Yes, it was in Lupus Valley. Those southern nobles are all treacherous, despicable, and fickle. Our 5th Temple Knight Regiment had been marching for 5 days. After entering Lupus Valley, we were betrayed by our allies. Tens of thousands of Coldwood Knights surrounded us. Our 5th Temple Knight Regiment had just retreated from the front lines. After the first wave of attack, we were caught off guard and lost 30% of our men. There were only a little more than 1,000 men left, almost all of them injured. The Frost Knights launched wave after wave of attacks. We relied on our broken camp to barely defend. We repelled the second wave of attack and lost 300 men. After the third wave of attack, we lost 200 men. After the fourth wave of attack, we were left with 80 men. We used up all of our berserk potions and had no supplies. What's worse was that the enemy had a strong person called the Corruptor. This warlock is extremely vicious. Under his spells, our weapons and armors were strongly corroded. We were cornered and in a desperate situation. At that time, the Frost Knights regiment commander called for us to surrender. We knew that the southern nobles wanted to capture us, so that they would have an important bargaining chip to negotiate with the emperor. But he underestimated us Temple Knights too much. We discussed for a while and launched our attack. We had no swords, but we were Temple Knights. We had no armor, but we were Temple Knights. We had no horses, but we were Temple Knights. We had no supplies, but we were Temple Knights. No matter how many enemies there are, how strong they are, how few we are, we will not surrender. Because we are Temple Knights. Chapter 9. The tavern was silent. All the Temple Knights stopped what they were doing and looked at the old captain, listening to his words. Their young faces were filled with intense excitement. "Let's charge! We've lost!" The old captain laughed and stroked his thick white beard, wiping off the wine stains on it. His face was full of pride. My strength was limited. I was hit by many blades and fell among the corpses like a dead dog. When I woke up, I found myself back in a holy temple. Then I found out that the entire 5th Regiment was dead. I was the only one left. The Coldwood Knights didn't let us off the hook. They killed every single one of our corpses. Every corpse was killed, but fortunately, the knight who killed them used a rapier. That rapier blinded me and stabbed into my head. My brain matter spilled all over the floor. It was the great emperor who personally saved my worthless life. He asked me what reward I wanted. I told the emperor and begged him to give me the designation of the 5th Regiment. I want to build another 5th Regiment. That's why you brats are here. Do you understand? Otherwise, why would the dignified Temple Knights recruit new members so easily? You little fellows, you've all run into dog's hit luck. But you're still too young. What's that battle? The old captain shook his head and didn't say anything else, only continuing to drink. He spoke very simply and crudely, but the young Temple Knights in the tavern were all excited. They began to talk excitedly. I know. In the Battle of Lupus Valley, our 5th Regiment only relied on a few thousand men to wipe out 5,000 Coldwood Knights. We wiped out 3 of their divisions. The Coldwood Knights had just cleaned up the battlefield when they were attacked by the 3rd Regiment of Temple Knights. They were all wiped out in Lupus Valley. The Coldwood Knights were the trump card of the Southern Noble Alliance. This battle has broken the backbone of the Southern Noble Alliance. That's right, these are our Temple Knights. We are unparalleled. No one can stop us. Even if we're in a desperate situation, we'll hold our heads high and face death. That's right. Charge, charge, charge to the death. The atmosphere in the tavern became lively again. The young Temple Knights were all flushed, either because of the wine or because of their excitement. The memories faded, but their voices seemed to linger in Zhen Jin's ears. Charge, charge, charge to the death. Zhen Jin rushed over without hesitation. The brown bear's ears immediately twitched as it heard the sound of movement. However, due to its heavy injuries, it was much slower than usual. As soon as it turned around, it saw the young man in the air. Zhen Jin sprinted and then jumped up. The dagger in his hand flickered with a cold light. The brown bear was caught off guard, and the dagger pierced through its remaining left eye. In an instant, it became blind. Roar! The brown bear was furious. The pain stimulated it, and the darkness in front of it made it completely erupt with the ferocity of a beast. The bear swung its arm fiercely, and Zhen Jin had no way to dodge. In a hurry, Zhen Jin could only curl up his body as much as possible and put up his 2 arms to protect his face and chest. Bang! With a muffled sound, the young man was sent flying by the brown bear at a speed twice as fast as before. He was smashed into the cave wall, and the arm he used as a shield was completely broken. Because of a strong impact with the cave wall, his shoulder blade and ribs were fractured in many places. His internal organs were also affected. The impact was too strong, and it seemed to have caused internal bleeding. Jinjin cried out and spat out a large mouthful of blood. The pain spread throughout his body, and the young man's face was pale. However, under such circumstances, a new power emerged from the depths of his body. This was the effect of the berserk potion. Spitting out another mouthful of blood, Jinjin exerted strength in his legs and kicked himself out of the cave wall. Kill! He let out a low growl and once again charged at the brown bear. In an instant, the wind whistled in his ears. He seemed to have broken through the limit of what he could bear. Because of the intense movement, the pain increased, but it stimulated him even more. His two arms were completely numb, and they were like two thick noodles as he ran, leaving the young man behind. The brown bear's attack just now was no small matter. It directly smashed the young man's arm bones, and his muscles were also smashed into minced meat, barely binding them together. The brown bear went crazy and attacked randomly in the cave, splashing ores everywhere. The trivial ores hit Jin's body, and the young man's face was as solemn as iron. He lowered his head and dodged a swipe of the brown bear's sharp claws, and the speed of his charge was increased to the limit. He stepped on the cave wall, and after a few steps, he leaped up and jumped into the air again. The brown bear's eyes were blind, and it was in a frenzy, so it didn't notice. Jin took the opportunity, and as he fell in the air, his right foot stomped on the dagger in the brown bear's eye socket. Uffed, blood and brain matter splashed out, and the dagger went deep into the brown bear's brain. The dagger that was left outside the eye socket was now gone. Roar! The brown bear let out the most mournful and painful roar in its life. Following a beast's intuition and instinct, it grabbed Jinjin. His fingernails, which were as sharp as knives, once again emitted intense heat and turned scarlet red. Its nails pierced deeply into Jin's waist and abdomen, piercing the young man from front to back, and then throwing him to the ground. The sharp tips of its nails pierced into the hard mountain because it used too much strength. The hot claws pierced through Jinjin as easily as a hot knife cutting butter. Jinjin roared in pain. His intestines and flesh were already burned. At this moment, he fully experienced the pain of those scaled, horned black panthers. Sir, ZD could not help but let out a mournful cry at such a tragic battle scene in front of her. When the cry reached Jin's ears, Jin regained a trace of consciousness from the intense pain. His waist and abdomen were stuck to the ground by the sharp claws, almost fixed in place. At this moment, the brown monkey tail bear had already bent over, and its bloody mouth was right in front of Jin. At this critical moment, the young man used all his strength to twist his upper body to the limit. The brown bear did not have any vision. Its attack was smoothly dodged by Jin. With a bang, the bear's head smashed into the ground, and its sharp teeth gnawed at the ground, causing all kinds of gravel to fly. Jin's arms were already crippled. In this desperate situation, the young man could only learn from the brown bear and bite the brown bear's neck. On the brown bear's neck, there was a very terrifying wound. This was the heavy price the brown bear paid when fighting the scaled horned black panther not long ago. The wound was so deep that the bone could be seen and the skin was long gone. Jin almost buried his head in, and after a few bites, his mouth was full of the brown bear's flesh. The brown bear's wound was originally bleeding profusely, but after the brown bear swallowed the ore, the bleeding had stopped. Now it was being bitten by Jin, and the arteries inside were bitten off. A large amount of blood gushed out, and the blood flow was even faster than before. In an instant, the bear's blood was all over Jin's face. Jin seemed to have buried his head in a small waterfall and could only close his eyes tightly. His mouth and nose were filled with a terrifying stench, and there seemed to be a trace of sweetness. Jin was still desperately fighting back, constantly biting the brown bear's flesh. Therefore, a large amount of bear's blood poured into his throat, and the young man could barely breathe. But at this time, why would he care about breathing? The fight between the two sides had reached the most critical moment. Who would win and who would lose, who would live and who would die? Jin began to choke on blood, and his lungs were also filled with bear's blood. It was extremely uncomfortable. The violent bear let out a mournful growl, and it was panicking. It could not see the young man, but it could feel the weakness of Jin's body. However, Jin was more ferocious than any beast it had ever seen in its life. ZD was also stunned. She stared blankly at the scene of the human bear biting, and her eyes lost focus. Like a stone statue, she was stunned to the spot. The brown bear wanted to pull out its claws and tear the young man to pieces, but it failed several times. It turned out that it had gone through a great battle and was already an arrow at the end of its flight. After suffering the young man's desperate fight, its strength rapidly weakened, and like an avalanche, it could not even pull out its claws. Bang! Finally, the brown bear fell to the ground, motionless. Its huge body was several times larger than Jin's, but in the end, it was the loser. Jin also fell to the ground, coughing violently and vomiting chunks of flesh and blood from his mouth. After vomiting the flesh and blood, the young man could finally breathe smoothly. He was like a drowning man who was on the verge of death, but had come ashore. For a moment, his chest rose and fell, and he panted like a bellows. After a few breaths, he began to cough again and spat out blood again. It was unknown whether it was the brown bear's blood or his internal bleeding. A strong sense of dizziness filled the young man's mind. The young man wanted to get up, but after trying, it ended in complete failure. His abdomen was still stabbed into the ground by the brown bear's claws, and it was bleeding nonstop. And after the fierce fight, the original penetrating wound was violently pulled, and the wound was completely torn open. The pitch-black intestines that had been burned by the claws flowed out of the huge torn wound. The young man fell to the ground again with a thump. He looked at the huge bear corpse and laughed weakly. This laughter was similar to the old captain of the 5th Temple Knight Regiment. Then, Jin's eyes gradually became dull, and his laughter quickly weakened. After a few breaths, his pupils completely lost their luster. The effect of the berserk potion had passed. The young man completely lost consciousness. For a moment, both man and bear were motionless. Chapter 10. Darkness. In the deep darkness, the youth gradually regained consciousness. Where? What is this place? Where am I? No one answered him, and the darkness was filled with silence. Who am I? Why am I trapped here? What am I doing? The youth became anxious. He felt as if he had forgotten something extremely important. He tried his best to recall, but to no avail. He began to struggle, wanting to break free from the cage of darkness. Then, an illusory light appeared in front of his eyes. The tiny light was especially obvious in the darkness. As the light flickered, the youth regained some of his memories. He seemed to have returned to the tavern, where he, as a member of the Knights Templar, was celebrating after winning the battle. He was listening to the teachings of the old captain. The light in the darkness was like the dim candlelight in the tavern. The youth felt warm and was about to fall asleep in a daze. At this moment, he suddenly heard the roar of a beast. In the midst of the beast's roar, the light suddenly became clear. The youth was disappointed to find that he was not back in the tavern, but in a scorching hot mine cave. The endless pain was like a wave, constantly assaulting him. Jin felt as if he was a small sampan, which could be broken by the strong winds and waves at any time. Other than the pain, there was also an unbearable heat and an intense dizziness. Jin was not unfamiliar with these. The fire poison is acting up again, he thought. The brown bear's claws were still stuck in his abdomen, making it difficult for him to get up. The youth used all his strength to raise his head slightly. Then he saw the bear's corpse and the familiar figure beside it. It was ZD. She was collecting bear blood from the bear's corpse. She wiped the corners of her eyes from time to time, looking anxious. Jin immediately relaxed. He heard a beast's roar in the darkness and thought that a new beast was attacking. Seeing that ZD was safe and sound, he relaxed and no longer had the strength to raise his head. The back of his head hit the ground with a bang. ZD was startled by the sound, and seeing that Jinjin had regained consciousness, she cried out in surprise, "Sir, Lord Jinjin, you're awake." She immediately rushed to Jin's side. As he got closer, Jinjin noticed the girl's red and swollen eyes, as well as the obvious tear stains on her cheeks. Jinjin wanted to say something, but he couldn't. His throat and tongue were also swollen, making it difficult for him to speak. He could only smile bitterly. At this moment, the young man realized that if another wild beast were to attack, he would not have the strength to protect his fiancée in his current state. ZD said, "My lord, the fire poison is acting up again, and the medicine from before is no longer effective. I'm concocting a new potion. I'll definitely succeed. Believe me, my lord, you must not give up. I will definitely save you." When ZD comforted Jinjin, it was more like she was deceiving herself to boost her confidence. Jinjin nodded, but this extremely slight movement caused him to fall unconscious once again. After an unknown amount of time had passed in the darkness, he once again heard the roar of a beast and woke up. Seeing that there were no wild beasts attacking, Jinjin understood. Was it just an auditory hallucination? Then how long was I unconscious this time? He looked around and realized that ZD was right beside him. But this time, the girl did not collect the bear's blood. Instead, she cut open Jinjin's arm and drew out the young man's blood. More than half of the glass bottle was already filled with blood. At this moment, the young man's blood was dark red and boiling hot. Seeing that the young man had woken up again, ZD immediately said, "My lord, I'm treating you. I'll draw out your poisonous blood again to dilute the fire poison in your body." The young man was silent. Strangely, this time, he did not feel any pain. This was definitely not a good thing. Feeling pain was a normal perception of the human body. This was a perfect warning system, reminding the human body to protect itself in time. Jinjin knew that his current situation was extremely bad. Not only was the fire poison acting up again, but he had also been severely injured in the battle with the brown bear. The lack of pain meant that all the nerves in his body had been destroyed. Only his head still had a strong sense of dizziness. The young man did not dare to move rashly, because he was already experienced. Once he moved slightly, he would be knocked down by this dizziness and fall into a coma again. Jinjin could only look at the cave ceiling. Whether it was the wound or the blood being drawn, he did not feel anything. He had also lost his hearing. At this moment, the young man felt a strange sense of peace and quiet. Soon after, the tranquility in his heart faded and was replaced by fear that spread like a fog. Yes, fear. He was afraid. He knew that death was coming, and this fear was the fear of death. In fact, when he was facing the brown bear, he was also facing death. But at that time, he did not have the leisure to carefully savor it. The feeling of death slowly approaching was not pleasant at all. The young man felt his life slipping away, quietly, without a trace. The young man wanted to retain his life from the deepest part of his heart. But life was like water held up by two hands. No matter how hard he tried, the water would flow down through the gaps between his fingers and eventually flow away completely. He realized that he was a lamb waiting to be slaughtered and could only quietly wait for the Grim Reaper's scythe to reap his life. Jinjin originally thought that he was brave enough, but at this moment he felt his own fear, his own weakness. This fear was so real, so strong, that Jinjin fully realized that no matter how much suffering and training he received, he would not be able to face it completely calmly. Because he understood one thing. This fear was the most fundamental fear of any life. It was the instinct of any life to survive. Fear was like fog, shrouding his entire heart. At the same time, there was helplessness, despair, panic, anger, and other emotions that were born from fear. Jinjin began to pray. Great God, Supreme, Great Emperor. He was a holy knight, and the god he believed in was the Shengming Emperor of the human race. The Shengming Emperor was the leader of the human race. He had a cultivation base that surpassed the legendary rank, and was a god that walked among humans. Zhen Jin continued to repent to the Shengming Emperor. He tried to repent for his past mistakes, but awkwardly realized that because he had lost his memories, he did not remember any of his mistakes. Thus, he could only pray to the Shengming Emperor, begging him for mercy, begging him to protect ZD so that she could smoothly escape from this extremely dangerous island after his death. However, the young man's prayer to the god he had served all his life did not receive any response, not even the slightest response. Every holy night is watched by the Shengming Emperor. Could it be that on this island, the connection between believers and God can be cut off? With such doubts, Zhen Jin once again fell into darkness. Just like before, accompanied by a world-shaking roar, Zhen Jin once again woke up. This time, as soon as he woke up, Zhen Jin frowned. He once again felt an intense pain. It was different from the previous pain. This time, he felt as if his whole body was being pricked by needles. Every inch of his skin, every inch of his muscles, every inch of his bones, inside and outside of his body, seemed to have been tortured countless times, becoming riddled with holes. Not only that, the burning sensation from before, when the fire poison flared up, was even more intense. The young man felt as if he was placed in a bonfire and was burning fiercely. "It's working, it's working." ZD's shouts sounded in his ears. At this moment, the young girl seemed incomparably excited. Zhen Jin shifted his gaze and saw her actions. His heart also trembled. This young girl did not collect the bear's blood, nor did she draw his blood. Unexpectedly, she was splashing blood on Zhen Jin's wound. This was definitely bear's blood. Zhen Jin was originally riddled with scars, especially the wound on his abdomen, which was extremely terrifying. But now, the brown bear's sharp claws that pierced through Zhen Jin's abdomen had disappeared without a trace. ZD seemed to have splashed a lot of medicine on the wound, so much so that it mixed into a ball, like a low-quality painter's multicolored mixed paint. An endless stream of bear's blood was poured into this thick paint and was quickly absorbed. Zhen Jin's body at this moment was like extremely dry soil. No matter how much bear's blood ZD poured in, it would all be absorbed, and at an incomparably fast speed. What kind of treatment method is this? Can it really work? Zhen Jin saw himself in this state, and couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He absorbed more and more bear's blood, and the pain became more and more intense. But at the same time, his heart felt more and more powerful. Thump, 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 his heartbeat became faster and faster. The young man even had the misconception that if his heart were to beat a little faster, it would probably jump out of his broken body. This worry didn't last long, because Zhen Jin fainted once again. Because the pain increased several times, it was really unbearable, far beyond the limits of a normal human body. Chapter 11. After an unknown amount of time, Zhen Jin slowly woke up. The crisp sound of birds chirping could be heard, followed by a gentle breeze, bringing with it the fresh smell of grass and trees. Zhen Jin stared blankly for a moment before coming back to his senses. The first thing he discovered was that the pain that once tormented him had disappeared, leaving only a dull pain. He tried to raise his head, and the unbearable feeling of dizziness also dissipated without a trace. Then he discovered that there were many bandages wrapped around his body, especially around his waist and abdomen, where there were faint traces of blood. Zhen Jin exerted strength in his arms, supporting his upper body with difficulty. He had no strength in his body, as if he had been hungry for more than 10 days. At the same time, his mouth was dry, and he was extremely thirsty for water. When he succeeded in sitting on the ground, he was stunned. He looked at his arms and hands. Originally, his arm bones had been shattered, and the skin and flesh of his arms had been smashed into minced meat by the brown bear. But now it was almost healed. Only the surface of both arms had an abnormal red color, as if they had been cooked. Did ZD really do it? Amazing! Zhen Jin could not help but exclaim. If it was magic or divine arts, the difficulty would not be high. But here, ZD could not use her magic. To be able to do this with potions alone was really too powerful. Could it be that this fiancé of mine is also a master potion maker? Jinjin could not help but guess. He looked around, but ZD was not here. The youth quickly discovered that he was no longer in the depths of the cave. This was not the place where he and the brown bear fought to the death, but the area closer to the entrance of the cave. Because of this, the ores here were sparse, the air was not scorching, and he could even hear the chirping of birds outside the cave. Just now, the intermittent wind blew in. Listening to the crisp chirping of birds, Zhun Jin's heart gradually rose and fell. His gaze fell on the entrance of the cave, and on the wall of the cave, there was a blue and red wildflower stubbornly blooming. Zhun Jin looked at it quietly, and his eyes gradually reddened, almost to the point of tears. After being addicted to life and death, the ordinary scenery made him cherish it even more. He looked at this most inconspicuous wildflower, watching its delicate and small petals tremble in the breeze. His entire body and mind throbbed. This was the throbbing of life. I'm still alive, I'm still alive. The joy of being alive was like seawater covering a beach, endless and unending, making Zhun Jin unable to restrain himself. After a long time, Zhun Jin's surging emotions slowly dissipated. He had a new worry. Actually, it was quite dangerous here. Zhun Jin did not forget that there were still many corpses of scaled horned black panthers lying outside the cave. The fresh meat would attract predators. After experiencing these few days, Zhun Jin had thoroughly felt the dangers of this island. No matter how much he overestimated the danger, it would not be too much. The young man wanted to stand up, but his attempt failed. Being able to sit up was already the most he could do. His entire body was limp, especially his waist and abdomen. He felt as if a large piece of his body was missing, and his legs had no strength. "You're awake," a familiar voice sounded. ZD appeared at the entrance of the cave. She was stunned on the spot, her face full of disbelief. Jinjin nodded to her and smiled faintly. ZD finally confirmed that this was the truth. Her heart surged, and she took a few steps forward, almost throwing herself into Zhun Jin's arms. With her delicate body in his arms, Zhun Jin almost fell down. He patted his fiancée's small shoulders, his voice much hoarser than before. "I listened to you and did not give up." ZD nodded and released Zhun Jin, no longer hugging him tightly. Her pair of purple eyes stared at the young man without blinking. Both eyes met. ZD said emotionally, "Lord Zhun Jin, you are a true holy knight." For a moment, the young knight felt the girl's full respect and love, all of which was not concealed. Zhun Jin smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Not yet. I can't even use Do Chi until now," ZD said with certainty. "Sir, you will definitely be able to remember." The girl's confidence in Zhun Jin was far greater than the latter himself. "Sir, while you were unconscious, I also cleaned up the battlefield and disposed of the brown bear and black panther corpses. I used the brown bear's blood to create a temporary medicine. I sprinkled the medicine near the entrance of the cave. Now that the smell of the brown bear is here, it should be able to deter other predators. This place is safe for the time being. In addition, I also went deep into the cave and explored to the end. There's only one way out of this cave." Sir's decision at that time was incomparably wise. Zhun Jin nodded again and again, the worry in his heart finally disappearing. "Sir, how do you feel now?" ZD began to check Zhun Jin's wounds again. "I feel very good, but I have no strength," Zhun Jin answered truthfully. Looking at ZD's busy appearance, he admired this girl even more in his heart. The girl herself was at the Black Iron rank. Even if she could not use magic here, she still had the ability to create powerful medicines. At present, it seemed that Zhun Jin's protection of the girl with his life had also brought about great returns. Without the girl's help, Zhun Jin would have been dead long ago. In addition to admiration and gratitude, Zhun Jin also had another emotion rippling in his heart. ZD and Zhun Jin had a close relationship. The two of them were engaged. Zhang Jin's initial judgment was that the relationship between the two of them was more complicated than what he had expected. But no matter the specifics, the two of them had gone through life and death together. This camaraderie was not fake. Sir, your current condition is very stable. The reason why you are weak is because you lack rest. As long as you have enough food and water, you should be able to walk normally in a few days. ZD made a serious judgment after examining him. This is all thanks to your medicine. Jinjin praised. ZD shook her head. The situation was urgent at that time, and the conditions for making the medicine were too simple. To be honest, I had no confidence at that time. I just tried my best. I did not think that there would be such a miraculous effect. Perhaps. ZD wanted to say something, but stopped. Her beautiful purple eyes stared at the youth, sparkling with unconcealable curiosity and inquiry. Jean smiled. What do you want to ask? You don't have to worry. ZD immediately said, Sir, are you really only at the silver rank and not the gold rank? Jean muttered. Why are you so suspicious? ZD said, My lord, perhaps it's because my medicine has taken effect. But I think this possibility is too low. I think it is more likely that you have a strong life force. This kind of life force is not something that a silver rank can have. Only a gold life force can have this kind of atmosphere. Sir, you actually relied more on your own self-healing ability to get through this. You think that my cultivation is not at the silver rank, but at the gold rank? Jinjin frowned slightly. He couldn't help but look at his arm again. Now, his arm was almost as good as new. The youth remembered clearly how terrible his arm was previously. The wound on his waist was originally very serious. But according to ZD's observation, the wound on his abdomen had disappeared and new pink flesh had grown. To be honest, this degree of healing was only slightly weaker than regrowing a broken limb. Is it really because of the effect of the medicine? Jinjin couldn't help but be suspicious. His heart jumped. Could it be that my talent is very outstanding, and not only at the silver rank, but also at the gold rank? Could it be that I am a genius among geniuses? Then, why do I have to hide this talent? Could it be that I am afraid that someone will kill me in advance? That's why I have endured until now. His heart was full of doubts. Jinjin thought hard, but couldn't find an answer. He could only shake his head and smile bitterly. He said to ZD, Your guess is possible, but I can't answer you, because only a few scenes of my memory have been recovered. Unfortunately, as the person involved, the youth didn't know the truth. ZD brought over a water bag. Jinjin took it and drank it in small mouthfuls. Sir, how does it feel to drink water? The young girl looked concerned and nervous. Jinjin tasted it carefully and muttered, There is no feeling of pain. It seems to be the same as usual. ZD heard and sighed. That's good, but we still need to observe. Jinjin only drank water and didn't eat anything. He only drank a small part of the water. Although it was only to quench his thirst a little, Jinjin knew that he had to do this. Although from the outside, his injuries seemed to be recovering well, but the condition of his internal injuries couldn't be seen with the naked eye. ZD couldn't use magic here, and she wasn't a professional doctor. Jinjin also couldn't use his doqi. After drinking a little water, Jinjin lay down on the ground to rest and gradually relaxed. After ZD explored the end of the cave, she came to the conclusion that the cave was dug so deep, almost all thanks to the brown monkey bear. It was because it kept swallowing in the mountain that it gradually built this cave. The cave was so long that it proved that the brown monkey bear had lived here for a long time. The monkey-tail brown bear was a silver-level dire beast. Living here, it had established enough authority to deter the surrounding predators. With it as the center, the area had become a fixed territory to some extent. Especially since the horned leopards were defeated in a short period of time, there shouldn't be any predators that would dare to offend this place. After all, these wild beasts didn't know that the brown bear was killed by Jinjin. At the moment, the surrounding situation was still relatively safe. This cave could be used as a stable camp. Jinjin woke up in the morning, and at noon, he drank some water. This time, he drank a little more. In the afternoon, he had the urge to pee. However, his whole body was sore and weak, and he still couldn't stand up. "Sir, let me help you." ZD had been paying close attention to Jinjin. She was very good at reading people's expressions, and when she noticed that the young man showed a little embarrassment, she understood. Jinjin could only lie on the ground, and with the help of ZD, he successfully urinated. "Sir, I am your fiancé. There is no need to be embarrassed." Even though ZD said so, her cheeks were still flushed red, and the hair in front of her forehead was slightly sticking up. It seemed that her whole head was steaming. ZD not only helped Jinjin put on his pants, but also carefully observed Jinjin's urine. "Sir, at the moment, it seems that your injuries are recovering well. You can rest assured and drink water, but you still need to be careful when eating." A moment later, ZD reported with joy. Jinjin nodded. He also felt a little happy. The digestive and urinary systems of the human body were very important, and Jinjin would rather lose 2 arms than have problems with his digestive and urinary system. Losing an arm was inconvenient, but if there were major problems with his digestive and urinary system, it would be life-threatening. When night fell, Jinjin began to eat. The coarse rations and the word delicious were completely different. But Jinjin ate with satisfaction, and even felt a kind of spontaneous happiness. To be honest, the young man's stomach was rumbling with hunger, and he could eat several cows in one meal. But he endured it, and according to the process of drinking water, the rations he ate for the first time were still small. When he woke up the next day, he recovered some strength and could stand up on his own, but he still couldn't walk a few steps. He didn't feel dizzy, but he lacked too much strength. He even felt that his 2 arms were thick and heavy, and he had the illusion that he couldn't bear it. The young man didn't force himself, and wisdom and patience were also virtues that holy knights respected. He ate a little in the morning, and even more in the afternoon. In the evening, he succeeded in producing a bubble of feces. Although ZD wanted to help, this time Jinjin insisted on finishing the excretion himself. ZD was very happy after observing Jinjin's feces. "Sir, your body is recovering very well. To be more precise, it's extremely astonishing. This kind of physical quality is definitely not something a silver rank can possess." ZD stared at Jinjin, her purple eyes emitting a scorching light. "Good news, everyone. The Black Sky group of the Goo World has been unblocked, and it's still full of close to 3,000 people, suitable for discussing true Master Goo. The Unlimited Blood Core official group has been unblocked, group number 676199473. The discussion of the new book Unlimited Blood Core has been upgraded to thousands of people, and it's open to the public. If you're interested, you can add. The Unlimited Blood Core official group is open to official readers, and there are certain conditions to join. You need to first join the Unlimited Blood Core official group verification group 316556526 for verification. Currently, there are only 2 official groups for the new books. This Saturday at around 8 p.m., there will be a QQ group activity. At that time, it will appear in the unofficial group, and then it will be withdrawn from the unofficial group. The activity is mainly to answer questions about the new book, listen to friends' reading feelings, and actively absorb the suggestions. I'm sorry, there are too many groups, and my personal energy is too limited. In the future, the activity will be in the official group, and the groups established by readers can be linked. As for the linking system, it's currently being discussed with the administrators. I know everyone's hope for Immortal Goo, but please try not to associate the 2 books with each other. This will affect everyone's reading experience. The 2 books are different, and the new protagonist will have a new atmosphere. Similarly, I've done my best to create them. I actually regret telling everyone about my cold-blooded style, and many people were affected by this sentence, which then reduced the reading experience. The new book should be viewed with a new perspective. The meaning of this sentence is to ask everyone to try their best to put aside the influence of true Master Goo and fully immerse themselves in a new story. At the same time, I also hope that everyone will try their best to put aside some reading habits of web novels. Most web novels are fast songs, and this book is a slow song. Two different kinds of brilliance. Slow songs need time, patience, calmness, and aftertaste. This is a small piece of advice I'm giving everyone about reading. This book will be written for 2 to 3 years. Let time prove everything. Chapter 12. On the morning of the third day, Jean slowly woke up. It was peaceful. He had rested well last night. The ground under his body was no longer dry and hard, but covered with a layer of fluffy and dry leaves. This was something that ZD had specially picked up for Jean. Thinking of his fiancée, Jean felt a surge of warmth in his heart. But ZD was not nearby. Before going to bed last night, ZD had suggested to Jean, take some of Jean's blood and check if there was any residual fire poison. If possible, it might be able to determine Jean's true cultivation level. Jean agreed. This girl, could it be that she didn't rest at all last night? Jean's face darkened, and he began to worry. Although he was asleep, he was very confident that if there was any movement around him, he would immediately notice it. Jean looked at the hay on the other side. It was very fluffy, and there was no trace of pressure. Jean was very sure that ZD did not sleep here last night. After she went into the cave, she did not come out again. Jean got up and went into the cave. ZD had made some arrangements in the depths of the cave, forming a temporary place to concoct medicine. In the 2 days that Jean was resting, she basically did not go out. Even if she went out, it was only near the cave. Most of the time, other than looking after Jean, she was fiddling with her medicine in the cave. Jean walked into the cave. As expected, he saw ZD kneeling in between the pits. These pits were of different sizes. The larger pits were filled with the blood, bones, and fur of wild beasts that had been processed. The smaller pits were filled with all kinds of medicines, as if a colorful miniature dye house had been opened. "My lord, you're awake?" Hearing the movement, ZD turned to look at Jean, but did not get up. Her hands did not stop moving as she continued to concoct medicine. "Please forgive my rudeness, sir. I am currently concocting a potion." ZD shook the glass bottle in her hand. At the same time, the fingers of her other hand kept twisting, sprinkling out the sand-like ingredients. This glass bottle was only the size of an adult's finger, and the medicine inside seemed to be bear blood. It was dark red in color. The sand-like ingredients blended into the potion and adhered to the inner wall of the glass bottle. ZD's eyes were fixed on the glass bottle. Sometimes she added more sand, and sometimes she scooped some bear blood from the pit on the ground and added it. Finally, it seemed to have reached some kind of balance. The sand particles attached to the inside of the glass bottle completely melted, and not a single one remained. ZD nodded slightly. Only then did she put the cork on the reagent bottle in her hand and put it on the wooden shelf on the other side. This wooden frame was crudely built with a few dead branches, and it was almost filled with glass bottles. Jean saw that these glass bottles were filled with wild game potions and couldn't help but ask, "So, you've been concocting these potions all night? Is it really good to be so tired?" "Thank you for your concern, sir." ZD smiled and immediately explained, "If I don't concoct them, the bear blood will lose its effect. These are all good materials. Unfortunately, I don't have enough refining tools. This kind of silver-ranked bear blood is too extravagant and wasteful to concoct wild game potions. Most magic materials had a time limit. After the time limit, the value of the materials would greatly decrease." Jean nodded and acknowledged ZD's efforts. "Thank you for your hard work." As he spoke, he looked at these glass bottles. His gaze was somewhat fixed. It was very strange. He seemed to feel the sweet smell of the glass bottles, and from the bottom of his heart, he had an urge to drink the bear blood. "Am I too hungry?" Jean immediately suppressed this strange feeling. To be honest, he had rested for 2 days and hadn't eaten a full meal. Although he knew that he had recovered well, he still carefully controlled his appetite. In this way, the bear blood and leopard blood have been used up. The next step is to deal with the meat. ZD licked her dry lips. After working here for a long time, her forehead was covered with sweat. ZD took out a piece of beast meat from the big pit and covered it with a layer of yellow and green herbs. Then, she took out a small tube of potion from her bag and slowly poured it out. This tube of potion did not use a glass bottle. It seemed to be made of pitch black ironwood. Only a small amount of the liquid was poured down, but it quickly spread and permeated, and a pungent smell rose. Sizzle, after a slight corroding sound. The originally plump beast meat became extremely dry. ZD tore the jerky apart and continued to ravage it. The jerky first became strips of meat and then was squeezed into a ball of meat floss. In these 2 days, Jean ate this kind of meat floss other than dry rations. They did not start a fire. On one hand, they were taught a lesson by the poisonous fire bees, which made them very cautious about starting a fire. On the other hand, it was not convenient to start a fire in a cave. It was easy to cause a lack of oxygen, smoke pollution, and even poisoning. After this kind of treatment, although the meat floss was not delicious, it retained its nutrients and killed any bacteria and toxins that might exist in the meat. These are all good magic materials. If sold outside, they can be sold for a lot of gold coins. What a pity. Even if you give me the most common crucible now, it will be good enough. ZD shook her head as she processed, expressing her regret. Jean smiled. He did not persuade ZD to rest after a night of hard work. Instead, he sat cross-legged beside ZD. Is there anything I can help you with? ZD smiled. Since my lord said so, then I won't be polite with you. Next, ZD only did the small work of pouring the potion, and Jean was responsible for tearing the jerky and making it into meat floss. The two divided the work, and their efficiency increased greatly. When they were working together, Jean awkwardly found that in a few holes in the corner, there were urine and feces that he had excreted over the past few days. Studying these will allow me to investigate the condition of my lord's body, ZD said calmly. But unfortunately, I can't detect your true strength. Also, I want to analyze and recreate the potion that healed your injuries. If it was really my potion that healed your injuries, then the value of this potion formula will be very high. Such a research attitude. Should I say that you are worthy of being a mage? Jean muttered in his heart, but he agreed with her. You did the right thing. Did you find anything? ZD sighed and said with a gloomy expression, the situation was very urgent. Some of the key steps were based on my intuition. I couldn't even estimate the ratio of the ingredients. It is impossible to recreate the potion completely. I can only do my best. But it's not that I didn't find anything else. I used the bear's blood and ores to create 2 potions. One can promote combustion, and the other can resist fire. Jean nodded. After he helped ZD get rid of all the beast meat, he patted ZD's shoulder and suggested, let's eat together. The two of them ate some dry rations, some freshly made meat floss, and some water. The water was warm. Although they did not start a fire, they could rely on the ores to heat it up. In such an environment and condition, drinking a mouthful of warm water would bring the greatest comfort. When the warm water flowed down the throat and into the stomach, the whole soul would feel like it was being gently comforted from top to bottom. There was enough food, but not much water. The two of them were very frugal. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water, Jean said, let's talk about you, ZD. ZD nodded. My lord, I am your fiancé. There is no doubt about that. Then, which family are you a member of? Where is your family's territory? ZD laughed bitterly. My lord, you overestimate me. I'm not a noble. I am just a merchant. My family has been doing business for generations. Oh, Jean could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. This answer was a bit unexpected. The marriage partners of nobles were almost always nobles. Some nobles even married their relatives in order to maintain the purity of their bloodline. So, you have awakened some kind of superior bloodline? Jean asked again. This was also possible. Although nobles only had one wife, they usually had a lot of lovers and illegitimate children. It was very difficult to determine the true bloodline just by looking at the family tree. In history, there was no lack of inferior nobles with a strong, superior bloodline. There were even commoners who suddenly erupted with astonishing potential. After tracing back, it was discovered that their bloodline came from a superior noble. Often, these people with strong bloodlines would be recruited by nobles and incorporated into their family. However, ZD shook her head again and showed a trace of bitterness. "I am very sorry to disappoint my lord. My bloodline is very ordinary. In fact, to be able to reach the Black Iron rank has almost exhausted my potential. I'm not a noble. My ancestors were not nobles. My father was the previous president of the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce. Now, it is my turn to control the Chamber of Commerce." Wisteria Chamber of Commerce? That name sounds familiar. Wait, could it be? Chapter 13. In Zhang Jin's knowledge, there was information about the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce. There were 6 major chambers of commerce on the Shengming continent. The 6 chambers of commerce had a long history, and each chamber of commerce was a colossus backed by powerful nobles. Their businesses spanned the mountains, forests, lakes, and deserts. Under these 6 chambers of commerce, there was a chamber of commerce that rose rapidly in the past 100 years. It quickly became a miracle that was second only to the 6 chambers of commerce and left the other chambers of commerce far behind. This chamber of commerce was the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce. The Wisteria Chamber of Commerce attracted a large number of small and medium chambers of commerce, and even accepted individual shops and independent merchants. It had a large scale and influence in the middle and lower markets. However, due to the lack of protection from the upper echelons, the nobles of the Shengming Empire coveted the Chamber of Commerce's profits and chose to take action. The Wisteria Chamber of Commerce was suppressed, and the Chamber of Commerce's president accidentally died. The Chamber of Commerce was now fragmented and divided among the nobles. After my father's accident, I was his only daughter. I didn't want to give up. If I let the efforts of my father, grandfather, and ancestors go to waste, then I would be too unfilial. Many of the Chamber of Commerce's elders were also unwilling to surrender, so they united by my side. However, no matter how much money you have, it is no match for power. My father's death made me realize that I had to participate in the empire's power struggle. Based on the Chamber of Commerce's previous development, the more money and scale, the more likely it was to walk down the path of destruction. I carefully selected a partner for the Chamber of Commerce, and in the end, we hit it off, sir. Zhen Jin's mind seemed to have been struck by lightning, and he immediately understood the cause and effect. Although he only had a few memories, Zhang Jin knew that the 100 Needles clan was a southern noble. The Shengming Emperor was a man of great talent. He unified the entire human continent and named it the Shengming continent. The final step in conquering the continent was to annex the southernmost part of the continent. The decisive battle was the annihilation of the Coldwood Knights. The Shengming Empire's conquering army was trapped in the mountainous terrain, and their conquest of the southern part of the continent was at a stalemate. The southern nobles who had surrendered saw hope in the stalemate and secretly contacted the southern nobles to form an alliance. The 5th Temple Knight Legion withdrew from the front lines to rest and reorganize, and the southern nobles who had surrendered sent the Coldwood Knights to carry out an ambush. The Coldwood Knights were the strongest legion in the Southern Noble Alliance. They had wiped out the 5th Paladin Legion, but were defeated by the Paladins who came to reinforce them. With the Coldwood Knights defeated, the Southern nobles hurriedly sent in reinforcements, causing a huge hole to appear in the originally impregnable defensive line. The Empire's response was extremely fast. The frontline legions moved out together and launched an all-out attack, completely crushing the Southern nobles' defensive line. As a result, the Southern nobles suffered a crushing defeat. They no longer had the ability to stop the army of the Sacred Empire. They either died in battle or surrendered. The Southern nobles who had surrendered and then rebelled were also severely purged. The 100 Needles clan was one of these nobles. At the time, a considerable portion of the Knights of Mount Han were members of the 100 Needles clan. Although the 100 Needles clan had survived the purge, their territory, wealth, and army had been greatly reduced. Furthermore, in the following period of time, they were suppressed and ostracized by the nobles of the empire. The Hundred Needles clan naturally did not want to fall. On one hand, they gathered other clans in the same situation to form an alliance. On the other hand, they actively studied the upper echelons of the empire. The Hundred Needles clan sending Zhenjin into the Paladin Legion was one of the results of this. The Paladin Legion was the trump card legion of the Sacred Empire, directly under the Shengming Emperor. It was the most direct military force of the emperor. Every Paladin Legion worshipped the Shengming Emperor. If one even offered their faith, their loyalty would naturally be full. Thus, the Paladin Legion was the most trusted by the Shengming Emperor. Generally speaking, there were very few nobles in power in the empire, and they would not even send their descendants into the Paladin Legion. Offering faith was equivalent to cultivating an ingrate in the family. The nobles believed in benefits above all else. Most of the time, the family's benefits were above all else. The smaller nobles, palace nobles, and individual nobles under the emperor would selectively send their descendants into the Paladin Legion. Zhenjin, as the only heir of the Hundred Needles clan, joining the Paladin Legion was the most sincere expression of the Hundred Needles clan's loyalty to the Shengming Emperor. This diplomatic action successfully alleviated the external pressure of the Hundred Needles clan, but it was unavoidable for Jin Jun to be suppressed and ostracized by the Temple Army. It was natural and reasonable. After all, in the past, the Coldwood Knights had almost wiped out the 5 Paladin Legion. Who among the nobles was not related? Zhenjin, who had become a paladin, already had a deep grudge with his peers. Sending the heir to the Temple Legion was indeed a wise move. Because completely relying on the Shengming Emperor's political faction was in the best interest of the clan. Zhenjin recalled his father. Clearly, that middle-aged nobleman with 2 slender tufts of beard had the wisdom and decisiveness of a clan leader. And as the only heir of the Hundred Needles clan, I was pushed aside and suppressed after joining the temple. This should have been within my expectations, and I chose to endure it at that time. Zhenjin recalled the second scene. In his memories, Qin Kuei was clearly looking for trouble, deliberately making things difficult for him. His motives were understandable. Perhaps one of his relatives had died in the 5th Legion. As for Zhang Jin's own actions, he could also make a judgment. Although he had outstanding talent, he did not seek the limelight. Instead, he chose to hide his talent and concentrate on cultivation. Usually, he kept a low profile to prevent political opponents from suppressing him or even killing him in advance. When he became a paladin, he wanted to find allies in the emperor's camp and not make enemies everywhere. As the future leader of the clan, he came with a diplomatic goal. There was no lack of opportunities to build friendships in the army. In the face of great external pressure, the paladins forced themselves to trust each other and rely on each other. Such a life and death experience would greatly dissolve the enmity of the past. Through this method, the Hundred Needles clan broke away from their political predicament and became a member of the emperor's camp. However, the Hundred Needles clan could only be said to have barely gained a foothold. This noble clan was still in dire straits. How could they expand their territory, increase their wealth, and increase the clan's strength? The human continent had already been unified by the Shengming Emperor. There were not many opportunities left. The humans' invasion of the Beast Continent was the best opportunity for many nobles to expand their territories and establish their military exploits. White Sand City was the opportunity for the Hundred Needles clan. Therefore, Zhang Jin came to compete for the position of City Lord. From ZD's perspective, the Merchant Guild was divided into the Violet Vine Merchant Guild. The chairman of the Violet Vine Merchant Guild had died because of this. If the elders could lower their heads, they would have already joined these nobles. The elders of the Violet Vine Merchant Guild who had gathered around ZD were naturally enemies of these nobles. As a result, ZD could only join the emperor's political camp. Among these members, the stronger ones looked down on the remnants of ZD's Merchant Guild. Perhaps a complete Violet Vine Merchant Guild could tempt them, but the current Merchant Guild was already fragmented. Those with average strength also had concerns. ZD's people could be said to be the essence of the Violet Vine Merchant Guild. Recklessly accepting them would be making an enemy of the powerful nobles of the empire. The gains and losses and risks involved had to be carefully considered. The weaker members, such as the nobles of the palace, did not even have territory. The Merchant Guild could not find a place for them. At the same time, as the new leader of the Merchant Guild, ZD had her own concerns. She would try her best not to join a powerful noble. After all, she was only a Black Iron Mage. Too powerful a noble would very likely swallow up the remaining Violet Vine Merchant Guild in the future. After careful consideration, ZD set her sights on the Hundred Needles clan. The current head of the Hundred Needles clan was a gold mage, but he was severely injured and lost his right arm. The Hundred Needles clan was once a powerful noble in the south with a long history. After being forced to join the empire, the Hundred Needles clan was ostracized and suppressed. Now that they barely had a foothold, they urgently needed to expand and develop. The Hundred Needles clan's territory was taken away, and their existing territory was lacking in resources. They were also ostracized by the surrounding territories. Therefore, the Hundred Needles clan needed the Violet Vine Merchant Guild channel. They valued the Violet Vine Merchant Guild more than the other clans. The most important thing was that the Hundred Needles clan was willing to pay the price. They did not hesitate to promise the Merchant Guild the marriage of their future heir. After the agreement was made, the engagement ceremony was held, and the news was spread widely. All of these reasons miraculously created the unmarried couple Zhenjin and ZD. They had their own difficulties, and they needed each other. This was not only their wish, but also the wish of the forces behind them. Otherwise, how could a noble like Zhenjin be engaged to a girl with a low bloodline? The Hundred Needles clan sent their only heir to the Holy Cathedral, and now to the front lines of White Sand City, bearing the huge risk of their heir dying in battle. This is a gamble. The Violet Vine Merchant Guild is the same. Both of us have no way out. No wonder ZD has never abandoned me. Zhenjin's thoughts were thousands of thoughts, and he finally understood the complicated situation. Looking at the girl in front of him, Zhenjin felt even closer. Zhenjin did not hate alliances based on benefits. Instead, he approved of them. Alliances based on benefits were usually more reliable than friendship. Moreover, friendship could be cultivated. Coupled with marriage, Zhenjin understood that ZD would be his most reliable ally in the future. ZD continued. We took the ship to enter the Beast continent and compete for the position of White Sand City Lord. However, we encountered an inexplicable shipwreck during the voyage and ended up on this island. Zhenjin muttered, So, what we need to do now is not only to leave this place alive, but also to gather more subordinates. ZD, how many troops do I have, and how many reliable retainers do I have? Faced with this question, ZD showed a rare moment of hesitation. She deliberated for a moment before saying, Sir, you have the qualifications to compete for the position of White Sand City Lord, and you also have extraordinary talent and strength. This time, we mainly brought the backbone of the Wisteria Merchant Guild's armed forces, and we also hired 2 famous mercenary groups. Zhenjin was startled. He could hear it. He did not have any retainers or troops. He was just a general without an army. He had no choice but to rely on the Wisteria Merchant Guild and hire 2 mercenary groups. This was too embarrassing. As the only heir of a real noble family, he had to risk his life to fight for a future on the front lines. But he did not have any troops by his side. Compared to the mercenary groups that worked for money, the Wisteria Merchant Guild's armed forces were Zhenjin's most trusted forces. The Hundred Needles clan has fallen to this point, but it doesn't make sense to have no one. This abnormal situation made Zhenjin frown. ZD explained, there was indeed a group of people sent by Sir's clan. However, they were attacked by bandits on the way and were completely wiped out. At the same time, There were traces of goblins and ogres around the Hundred Needles clan's territory. We were worried that other competitors would arrive at White Sand City ahead of time and establish an early advantage. Therefore, we pretended to stay where we were, but in fact we disguised ourselves and secretly set out on the Pig's Kiss. Zhang Jin's pupils shrank as he snorted. It seems that the competition for the position of White Sand City's lord is very fierce. A noble's elite troops were actually annihilated halfway by so-called bandits. And the Hundred Needles clan's territory had long been a hinterland. How could there be any living space for goblins and ogres? Thinking of something, Zhang Jin asked, "Who is competing with me for the position of lord? Are they on the same ship as us?" ZD shook her head. "There are a total of 2. Both of them are Sir's colleagues. They are not on the same ship as us." Zhang Jin did not speak. He was thinking. This answer meant that they did not need to face malicious competitors on this island. But at the same time, it was very likely that this shipwreck was caused by these competitors. Diddy immediately said, "However, sir, there is a temple priest with us named Scabsand. He is the examiner of this competition. He is very likely still alive. If we can find him and bring him help, that would be the best." "Scabsand?" Zhang Jin raised his eyebrows, looking pensive. "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.